Chapter 1397. Fight! A roar that sounded like a tiger's shot into the sky from within Ninth Summit. It was Hu Zi's voice, and his figure instantly appeared before Su Ming's eyes. At the instant he walked out with his tiger-like body, he threw a punch. Vast physical power erupted from his fist, and a huge spike club appeared in Hu Zi's hand when he seized it with his left hand. Then, he swung it at the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Defire charging towards him. Booming sounds surged into the sky. Hu Zi was just one point where the two armies clashed. Around him were countless cultivators from Ninth Summit who were engaged in a frenzied battle to the death against those from Dark Dawn and Saint Defire. In this battle, they were fighting for their lives. There were also cultivators from the Berserkers among them. In this battle, they displayed the powerful physical bodies that belonged to the Berserkers. The enemy they faced was someone who had crushed the cultivators from the three true worlds in waves like a hot knife through butter after they descended. He had also killed the sublime paragon of the fourth true world and fourth true sacredine world to seal off their expanse cosmos, forcing the fourth true world to set up a rune. They did not seek to kill their enemies, only to struggle and fight back. They had also swept through true Morning Dao world. Wherever they went, not a single cultivator could stop them. It could be said that they were an army of powerful warriors who had never lost. They were Dark Dawn and Saint Defire. The people from Ninth Summit were prepared to die in this battle, but even if they died, they could not live in vain. Even if they died, they would kill a few people to accompany them in death. Killing one person would be worth it. Killing two would not be a waste of their lives, and killing three would be worth two. Ninth Summit was like that, and the Berserkers were even more so. Booming sounds surged into the sky. The sounds of battle were deafening, and they reverberated through the entire galaxy, becoming the most brilliant light in Su Ming's eyes. 6/10 of their cultivation bases had been sealed, but the 4/10 of the cultivators from Saint Defire and Dark Dawn were still a force of power that was not weak before the Ninth Summit from Arid Triad's true Morning Dao world. After all, it did not matter whether it was Dark Dawn or Saint Defire. They had inherited their legacies from the second era of their Aeon. Their cultivation systems and cultivation methods were several levels higher than those of the cultivators in Arid Triad. If Su Ming had not sealed 6/10 of his power, there would have been no suspense in this battle. Only then could it be considered fair to Ninth Summit. In truth, Su Ming could have sealed a few more realms, but if he had done so, it would not be considered as training, which was why he only sealed 6/10 of Dark Dawn and Saint Defire, so that they would only be half a realm higher than Ninth Summit. The sounds of battle instantly reverberated in the air, shaking the sky and earth. A large number of cultivators from Saint Defire and Dark Dawn surged into the gap in the rune. Almost at the instant they stepped in, Ninth Summit's resistance and the determination on the faces of hundreds of thousands of cultivators clashed with each other, and an explosion instantly erupted. As soon as they made contact, a large number of casualties appeared on both sides. A group battle like this was a test of a cultivator's individual cultivation base. When they clashed, the sounds of divine abilities rose and fell. The light from magical treasures clashed fiercely, creating ripples that swept out in all directions. In the blink of an eye, the shadow of death descended on the galaxy. It swung its reaping hand, as if it was taking away an endless amount of lives. This was the battle where Dark Dawn and Saint Defire suffered the greatest number of casualties ever since they invaded Arid Triad. It did not matter whether it was the attack by the three great true worlds at Arid Triad's Gap, Dark Dawn, and Saint Defire sweeping through true Morning Dao world, or the expedition to the other true worlds. None of them had suffered such a great number of casualties at the instant they clashed. After all, in the previous series of battles, Dark Dawn and Saint Defire had been undefeatable due to their great levels of cultivation. The 9 white-robed antecedental spirits gritted their teeth and rushed to the forefront. Wherever they went, the cultivators of Ninth Summit would retreat. These 5 were their opponents. Even though 6/10 of their cultivation bases had been weakened, they were still powerful. However, At the instant, the 9 of them stepped through the gap in the rune and entered the world where the ninth summit was, just as they were about to rush towards Zi, who was the craziest among the ninth summit's cultivators. The sounds of tumbling came from Tao ocean beneath the world. A great will instantly filled the area and enveloped the 9 of them, instantly drowning them in a will that was like a raging wave. It was the predecessor of Tao ocean. It enveloped the 9 people in its own will, and a battle of arts between antecedental spirits separated from the other cultivators took place between them. Not much bloodshed could be seen, but to the 9 antecedental spirits, the strength of the predecessor of Tao ocean was an existence they could not fight against after their cultivation bases had been weakened. At the same time, the berserkers in Ninth Summit displayed their pride as berserkers. Ever since their levels of cultivation had increased and they got used to true morning Tao world's presence, they started going through another metamorphosis. This metamorphosis was the result of accumulating strength, and it was a manifestation of the berserker's blood remaining. It was similar to how the living in All Spirits Hall had sacrificed themselves to help the latter. During the short period of time, the entire race continued becoming stronger and fought madly against Dark Dawn and Saint D-Fire in the chaotic battle. Su Ming sat on the sea of white bones and watched everything in front of him. His expression was calm, and not a hint of change could be detected on his face. If a blade wanted to be sharpened, its edges would definitely shatter. If a tree wanted to grow, it would definitely be drenched by wind and rain. Ninth Summit and the Berserkers were the 2 most important homes to Su Ming. If they wanted to grow, they had to go through wind and rain. They had to go through everything that all forces of power had to go through when they rose to power. Only by doing so could they grow into existences that towered over the heavens. Only by doing so could they no longer need Su Ming's protection and turn from relying on him to becoming stronger on their own. What Su Ming could do was to make the war a little fairer. However, if Ninth Summit could not get used to this sort of war, he would save them, and from then on, Ninth Summit and the Berserkers would not be allowed to appear in the world, because the time for Ninth Summit and the Berserkers to rise to power might not have yet arrived. It would be better for them to stay in Death region. If they could grow, if they had the conviction to fight, if they had the will to fight against the heavens, against men, and against all manner of living, then Su Ming would use his full strength to make Ninth Summit and the Berserkers become the strongest sect and race in the world. There was no other. As he watched the war unfold before him, gratification slowly appeared on Su Ming's face. He saw Ninth Summit's resistance, saw their unyieldingness and determination, and saw the most brilliant light erupting from their lives at that instant. It was especially so for Zi, who was in the crowd like a tiger. As he roared, he held a huge spiked club in his hand. As he swung it, he cursed loudly while howling, as if he could sweep away an entire army. Not a single hint of honesty could be seen on his face. Instead, there was a ferocious look on his face that caused the hearts of his enemies to tremble. There was also the headless eldest senior brother floating in midair outside Ninth Summit. He did not attack. The ones who attacked were the shaman souls surrounding him. They let out shrill screams and occasionally rushed out to charge towards the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D-Fire. By eldest senior brother's side was second senior brother. He was gentle and elegant, but at that moment, there was a grave expression on his face that had never been seen before. Orders were sent out from him, and he controlled all the changes in the battlefield. There were still quite a number of cultivators from Ninth Summit who had not attacked around him. Around him were quite a number of cultivators from Ninth Summit who had not attacked. She stood quietly and stared into the distance with a calm expression. Second senior brother was Ninth Summit soul, and Fong Songlan was the Berserker's soul. As for Su Ming, he was no longer the sect or the race's soul. He had already withdrawn from everyone's sight and become the sect and race's God. At that moment, Su Ming could indeed be called a god. If he could not, then there would no longer be a god in the world. He possessed the wills of the 3 great true worlds and could make the sovereign of Dawn Yin tremble in fear. This was Su Ming. A smile gradually appeared on Su Ming's face, But the sovereign of dawn, Yin Pei's expression became even more anguished. He did not dare turn his head back, so he could only watch the battlefield. While the cultivators from Saint Fire and Dark Dawn still had the upper hand, they no longer had any presence about them. 6/10 of their cultivation bases had been sealed in a bizarre manner. This was an incredibly huge blow to all the cultivators from Saint Fire and Dark Dawn. It was an invisible, mighty pressure that caused their hearts to tremble. They should not have continued fighting, but the orders from the Sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei forced them to fight. The series of events caused the momentum of the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Fire to weaken. If Ninth Summit's counterattack had not been too strong, then the momentum of the cultivators from Saint Fire and Dark Dawn would have slowly risen again. But what they encountered was an unprecedented battle in Ninth Summit. As the number of casualties increased, some cultivators from Ninth Summit chose to self-destruct before they died, and in terms of momentum, the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Fire were completely suppressed. The cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Fire saw the cultivators who had shouted the words Ninth Summit's glory before they died explode. If they had just self-destructed, then it would have been impossible for the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Fire to feel their hearts tremble. But the people who self-destructed stirred up a great wave when they self-destructed, and the power of their self-destruction surpassed that of their own self-destruction. Because all of them had a large amount of jade slips containing the power of chaos on them, along with a large amount of enchanted treasures that could self-destruct along with them. There were also self-destructing medicinal pills that the Ninth Summit had created. All of these exploded along with the cultivators who self-destructed, causing the power of their self-destruction to instantly increase by several-fold. This madness shocked Dark Dawn and Saint Fire. It was not just one or two of them, but thousands and tens of thousands. Powerful booms reverberated in the sky, and the waves of self-destruction swept through the battlefield like a huge hand of death, taking away a large number of lives who did not want to leave. Aside from that, there were some berserkers among the people who self-destructed. Before they died, they shouted the word berserkers, and their voices were filled with reluctance to part with the berserkers. However, they did not hesitate to self-destruct, even though they had already suffered irreversible injuries. With the power of their self-destruction, they completed the final dazzling moment in their lives. I'm the first to send you my monthly votes. Chapter 1398. In a normal battle, once a certain number of people died, their wills would definitely crumble and they would turn into scattered sand. But during the battle, even if the souls of those who died had been destroyed by self-destructions, they had become spirits in the hearts of the living. They became medicine that stimulated their fates, and because of one sentence from Su Ming, they had turned into eternity. All the cultivators of Ninth Summit and berserkers who died in battle, I will not let your souls be lonely. Even if your souls scatter, they will gather together once more. The berserkers in Ninth Summit could not hear Su Ming's words. Only the Sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei could. Almost at the instant Su Ming finished speaking, a vortex suddenly appeared in the air above the battlefield where Ninth Summit's rune was damaged. It spun in reverse, and wisps of souls appeared in an invisible manner. The souls stared at the battlefield beneath them in a daze. When they saw everything clearly, shock and an even greater bewilderment appeared on their faces. All of them were the cultivators of the Ninth Summit and the berserkers who had died in battle. Almost at the instant they appeared, and the vortex rotated, glowing spots that the living could not see manifested in space. When they gathered together, the souls of all the cultivators of Ninth Summit and berserkers who had died in self-destruction swiftly gathered together once more in the universe. It was as if there was a supreme law in the universe, and there was a sentence written clearly in it. And that sentence was the 39 words Su Ming had said previously. The living could not see them, but they could see everything in the battlefield, including Su Ming, who was in the distance. In their eyes, he was a gigantic sun, and it was so big that it seemed to be an existence that even the universe and the true world had to worship. I am the god of berserkers, the former fourth disciple of Ninth Summit, and one of the current creators of Ninth Summit. I, Su Ming, will create the 10th summit with the will of true Morning Tao World, Immortal Sect World, and Sky Hill. The 10th summit will be known as Morning Mountain. It will gather the souls of all the people and cultivators of Ninth Summit who died in battle in my true world. Your souls will be gathered on the 10th summit, and you will guard the world for your sect and your people. You will be worshipped and will enjoy incense. You will be the guardian souls of your sects and people. I will grant you the right to be eternally imperishable as long as your sects exist. Su Ming's voice echoed in space. The living could not hear a booming sound that reverberated in the universe. A mountain that looked like a sword appeared in space and stood tall in the universe. The souls floating in the area looked at Su Ming. In their excitement, they bowed to him and flew into the mountain, becoming the first batch of imperishable warrior souls who would guard the world for the 10th summit. This scene caused the sovereign of Yin Pei to tremble. He saw everything clearly, and his expression became even more shocked and filled with disbelief. This isn't a law once I speak. This isn't a law with words. This ISN of Tao of law, of sovereign of Tao, of the laws of sovereign of laws. This is boundless Tao. That's why my words are like a boat, and it will never end. As the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei mumbled, his entire body was instantly drenched in cold sweat. Su Ming stared at the battlefield in the distance. He stared at the souls who had gathered together again and were not about to disappear, and the admiration in his eyes grew stronger. He saw Ninth Summit's counterattack. It might seem chaotic, but in truth, it was orderly. Everything was done according to the orders his second senior brother had given him, including the attacks in the beginning, the layers of suppression to prevent Saint D-Fire and Dark Dawn's momentum from rising, and the series of self-destructions that were happening right then. All of this was done according to his second senior brother's plan. He was going to suppress his enemies layer by layer and use their momentum to make Saint D-Fire and Dark Dawn's cultivation bases disappear in an unseen manner. With this method, most of the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D-Fire could only bring out 3/10 of their remaining 4/10 of power under the mighty pressure. Su Ming was smiling, but the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei was in shock. His mind was blank, and only after a long while did he gradually recover. His face was pale, and not a single hint of blood could be seen on his face. He could no longer change the situation of the battle. In truth, the moment the existence behind him was so strong that it made his heart tremble. Everything was set in stone. Just who is he? How could there be such a terrifying old monster in arid triad expanse cosmos? Damn it, those old monsters are all asleep. I've never heard of anyone waking up before this. Legends say that they were abandoned by the world. They're no longer in the will of the expanse cosmos and have jumped out of the world. When they wake up, it will be the moment before the world is destroyed. But this person clearly gives me the feeling that he's one of those old monsters. Furthermore, even among those old monsters, he could be considered a powerful expert. Boundless Tao. He's clearly a paragon expert of the boundless Tao realm. Damn it, how did he wake up? The sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei no longer thought about the deaths of the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D-Fire and their fated failure. Instead, he was thinking about how he could get through the disaster before him. Ninth Summit. That old monster cares so much about Ninth Summit. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have come looking for trouble and offended Ninth Summit. Fortunately, this is just my clone, but even if it's just a clone, if I lose one, it will still be a great blow to me. Besides, if this person wants to kill me, it will be incredibly easy for him to find me in arid triad expanse cosmos, unless I can run back to Dark Dawn's camp. While the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei was feeling anxious, the cultivators from Ninth Summit, Dark Dawn, and Saint D-Fire fought until the battle reached its climax. Hu Zi threw his head back and laughed ferociously. Wherever he went, it was as if there was no one there. His level of cultivation was powerful to begin with, and his enemies' levels of cultivation had been reduced by nearly 7/10, so he could be said to be nearly invincible in the area. unless it was some of the cultivators from St. Fire and Dark Dawn who were still strong enough even after their levels of cultivation had been reduced by 7/10. No one else was Hu Zi's opponent. As for the cultivators who were still strong even after their levels of cultivation had been reduced, their opponent was his eldest senior brother. His eldest senior brother might have seemed to be sitting still, but in truth, all the shaman souls around him had already reached the level of clones, causing practically every spot in the battlefield to be filled with the shaman souls. This also meant that his eldest senior brother was everywhere. It could be seen that during the time Su Ming was not in the ninth summit, his eldest senior brother's level of cultivation had increased, and the art of cloning clones he displayed right then made Su Ming cast a few more scrutinizing glances at him. This art was so strong that besides not moving his real body, he could also create hundreds of clones. They existed in various parts of the battlefield, and the power they displayed was the same as that of his eldest senior brother in Su Ming's memories. Su Ming also saw a faint hint of the will of an antecedental spirit from his eldest senior brother, who was sitting still. This discovery made Su Ming take a closer look, and he could tell that the will of an antecedental spirit belonged to the predecessor of Tao Ocean. Looks like Ninth Summit and the predecessor of Tao Ocean have been getting along very well during this period of time. A smile appeared on Su Ming's face. When he looked at his second senior brother, a hint of admiration appeared on his face. Second senior brother could not compare to Su Ming in terms of personal power, but in terms of control over the battlefield, all sorts of schemes, and overall planning, Su Ming could not compare to his second senior brother. Second senior brother could make Ninth Summit look as if it was made of steel and could even command the people in the battlefield to bring out Ninth Summit's combat prowess to its fullest. Su Ming could not compare to him in these aspects. As the cultivators from Dark Dawn and St. Fire gradually showed signs of wanting to retreat, and as the fighting spirit of Ninth Summit and the Berserkers grew increasingly intense, Su Ming narrowed his eyes. The trial could not end like this. Since it had already started, he had to reach a level where it would be carved into their bones and hearts in one go. Only by doing so could they turn the trials into a brand. Only by doing so could they ignite the fighting souls of Ninth Summit and the Berserkers so that the sect and race could rise to power in the midst of a great victory. They could also use this battle to spread the name of the sect and race through Arid Triad and lay the final foundation for their rise to power. Since you've chosen not to be lonely in this apocalyptic world, then I will give you a future of supremes, Su Ming thought in his heart, and a brilliant light shone in his eyes. Are you cultivators from Dark Dawn only capable of this much? When he spoke, there was a hint of freezing coldness in his voice. When it reached the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei's ears, his heart shuddered. Senior, hesitation appeared on Yin Pei's face. Dark Dawn and St. Fire fight against Ninth Summit at full strength. If you retreat, I will destroy your entire sect. Yin Pei gritted his teeth. He was completely intimidated by Su Ming, and he was in a life-threatening danger. At that moment, he could no longer care about anything else and immediately spoke. His voice reverberated through the galaxy of the battlefield, echoing in the hearts of all the cultivators from Dark Dawn and St. Fire who had the urge to retreat when they were completely suppressed by Su Ming's aura, forcing them to stop moving back. You can fight whenever you want, but only I can stop when I want, Su Ming said faintly. His words did not contain a lot of mighty pressure, but the domineering tone contained within them caused the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei's heart to tremble in fear. A fiend. This person is definitely a fiend. Perhaps during his era, he was also infamous. But why would such an old monster be connected to Ninth Summit? Anguish appeared on the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei's pale face. He stared at the people who had stopped retreating as his words echoed in the air, but there were quite a number of them who had turned their heads back to look at him. There was hesitation on their faces, and there was even a hint of resentment. Roars that sounded as if they were about to die tumbled out of the mouths of those from Dark Dawn and St. Fire. The next thing they heard was their crazed attacks and reckless attacks. After experiencing this madness, this sect and race will be able to bloom in Arid Triad, Su Ming mumbled. Su Ming mumbled as he watched the changes in the battlefield in the distance. All the cultivators' expressions and the circulation of their cultivation bases were clearly seen by Su Ming at that instant. It was like sharpening a blade. If only one side of the blade was sharpened, it would not be complete. Only when both sides were sharpened could it be considered a sharp blade, and right then, Su Ming was sharpening the other side. I'm sending the second update to you. Chapter 1399. In the face of Dark Dawn and Saint Defire's sudden madness, the time to test Ninth Summit and the Berserkers instantly arrived. It was not just a test of a person's level of cultivation, but also their will to fight for a long period of time. In fact, they had to know clearly how to face cultivators who had also been forced into a corner. To a sect and a race, this was an experience that was rarely obtained. After all, if things went wrong in this sort of battle, their sect and race would be destroyed. Su Ming wanted Ninth Summit and the Berserkers to go through this process because there might be more of such things in the future. Instead of running into them in the future, it would be better for them to go through it now. After all, only the difficulty of war could make the fruits of victory taste sweet, and that sweet taste would be something they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Su Ming also wanted to use this rare chance to let his second senior brother verify his ability as a commander so that he could be trained for the more difficult situations in the future. He also wanted the Berserkers and Ninth Summit to work together in this battle so that they could form a connection similar to blood that allowed them to advance and retreat together. Orders were swiftly sent to all corners of the battlefield by second senior brother. A large number of cultivators from the Nine Summits and Berserkers joined the battlefield to replace those around them and launch another huge battle against Dark Dawn and Saint Defire. Unfortunately for them, this situation did not last for long. A shocking bang reverberated in space, and most of Arun was torn apart, causing a large part of Ninth Summit's gap to be revealed in the galaxy, allowing more cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Defire to rush into it. Under Second Senior Brother's resolute orders, the cultivators from Ninth Summit and the Berserkers did not stubbornly continue defending the gap. Instead, they retreated in an orderly fashion, and the battlefield changed from the galaxy to the world where Ninth Summit was located. When Su Ming saw this, the admiration in his eyes grew stronger. He saw Ninth Summit's growth and his eldest senior brothers becoming stronger. All of this caused the warmth of the past to rise in Su Ming's heart, which no longer seemed to belong to a cultivator after he had become a will. Su Ming knew that he had changed. If it had been to him in the past, the instant he saw the Ninth Summit being surrounded, he would have personally attacked without any hesitation and killed all the invaders. Yet now he would not choose to do so. Most of his thoughts were focused on whether or not this sect and clan were suitable for living in the outside world. If they were, then he would make sure that they were even more suitable. If they weren't, then he would choose to give them at least 500 years of peace. As for himself, he would do everything in his power to fight for that 500 years. Everything he saw before his eyes told him that Ninth Summit and the Berserkers were suited to exist in the world outside. They had the power to become stronger, and even if Su Ming was not around, as long as a certain amount of fairness was given to them, they could still rise to power. And Su Ming could give them this fairness. Madness doesn't last for long. It's the same for a person, a clan, and a sect. If we can defeat them while they're in a state of madness, then we can crush their faith, and then we can win this war. When Su Ming said those words flatly, he looked towards Nine Summit's sect and saw his second senior brother staring at them with bright eyes while continuously issuing a series of orders. Based on the setup of Nine Summit's sect, Su Ming could tell that his second senior brother's choice was different from his own. He chose to temporarily avoid the brunt of the attack, and when the enemy's strength was exhausted, he would launch a full-powered attack. This method might be different from Su Ming's, but it was gentler. If his setup was complete, he could still win. Just when Su Ming thought he saw the results, the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Defire showed their craziest actions and rushed into Ninth Summit in large numbers. Suddenly, a loud bang that shook the sky and earth came from Ninth Summit. As it reverberated in the air, Su Ming's pupils shrank for the first time. He saw a floating continent crumbling with a bang in Ninth Summit's world. The power of its self-destruction instantly swept out in all directions and turned into a huge vortex. At the instant it rotated, booming sounds surged into the heavens, and the second and third continents crumbled at the same time. Soon after, the fourth, fifth, when 12 continents crumbled completely, they exploded. This was not caused by Dark Dawn and Saint D fire, but by Ninth Summit itself. At the instant the 12 continents crumbled, the destructive power formed spread through the entire world where Ninth Summit was, but most of it was gathered at the gap in the rune, causing a large number of cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D fire to be instantly affected. For a period of time, they suffered devastating casualties. Shrill roars and screams of pain filled the sky. This scene caused Su Ming's pupils to shrink. It also caused the originally absent-minded sovereign of Dawn, Yin Pei, to stand up swiftly. A solemn expression appeared on his face as he stared at Ninth Summit. If it were not because he had suddenly remembered that there was an existence behind him that made him tremble, he might have immediately gone out. The number of cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D fire who died this time was more than 100,000. The 12 continents had clearly been set up with countless runes and all sorts of enchanted vessels that could activate the power of self-destruction. The 12 continents had even been refined, causing them to look like continents, but in truth, they were huge, enchanted vessels. He used his own retreat as bait and delivered an unprecedentedly powerful strike when Dark Dawn and Saint D fire were at their most frenzied state. With one battle, he decided the fate of the universe. Su Ming stood up, threw his head back, and laughed loudly. His second senior brother's actions exceeded his expectations, but his decisive and straightforward strike had completely crushed the beliefs of the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D fire. In the midst of the loud bangs, the remaining cultivators from Saint D fire and Dark Dawn all retreated. Shock appeared on their faces, and their bodies trembled. There was too much blood, too many deaths, the suppression of their cultivation bases, and their enemies' fearless madness. All of this caused them to lose the courage to continue fighting. At the moment they lifted their feet, Ninth Summit and the Berserker's rise to power was destined to be a great victory. Kill them. Roars from the cultivators of Ninth Summit echoed in the air at that instant. Countless cultivators and Berserkers from Ninth Summit chased after the retreating cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D fire at full force. For a period of time, the battlefield was practically in chaos, but the situation was completely tilted in Ninth Summit's favor. Su Ming's laughter echoed in the air. When he swung his arm, his voice rang out. "You can stop this battle now. As for you, since you cooperated with me during the training, I won't kill you today. Get lost." Su Ming's voice was like thunder that shook the sovereign of Dawn's heart. As he shuddered, he moved without any hesitation and turned into a long arc that swiftly left into the distance. I've updated my chapter late today. I accompanied my daughter to the fish pond during the day, and when I came back in the afternoon, I immediately started writing. Please forgive me, everyone. When I get double monthly votes, I'm begging for monthly votes. I'll continue with the third chapter tomorrow. Do you have monthly votes? Chapter 1400. Today's third shift, tomorrow's third shift. This was the only sentence he could ask for monthly votes. But Jin felt that this sentence was more powerful than the others. Tomorrow's outburst. Everyone, do you have monthly votes? Chapter 1401. Before absolute power, forces of power were nothing. Su Ming already possessed this power. He watched Dark Dawn and Saint D fire, who had crumbled like a plate of loose sand, and the cultivators of Ninth Summit and Berserkers who rushed out to chase after him. A smile appeared on Su Ming's face. There were deaths and injuries in that battle, but the path of cultivation was a form of plundering lives. It was a bumpy path, and death was not terrifying. What was terrifying was the fear of death and the loss of a firm confidence. While staring at the galaxy, Su Ming took a step forward. When he landed, he was already in Ninth Summit. He appeared beside his second senior brother, who was staring at the changes in the battlefield with a confident and elegant look on his face. Second senior brother, Su Ming said softly. At the instant he spoke, second senior brother whipped his head around. Eldest senior brother, who had been meditating not too far away from him, also opened his eyes at that instant and cast his attention towards Su Ming. Su Ming appeared in front of second senior brother. With a smile on his face, he wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed to him. Eldest senior brother did not have a head, but his body was brimming with joy at that instant. Second senior brother's spirits lifted, and as he laughed, he hugged Su Ming. I knew that you would definitely be fine. As second senior brother laughed, he placed his hands on Su Ming's shoulders and stared at him closely. The camaraderie between brothers appeared on his face. You should have arrived a long time ago, right? How did your second senior brother fare in this battle? Second senior brother asked with a smile. There was a smug look on his face. Eldest senior brother also stood up. When he walked over slowly, he lifted his right hand and hugged Su Ming. He did not speak, but all his concern was contained in the embrace between brothers. There was no need for him to say anything else. When Su Ming sensed his eldest senior brother's powerful heartbeat, even if his level of cultivation had reached an unbelievable level and his will was so strong that it was second only to Arid Triad, he still seemed to have forgotten his own level of cultivation at that instant. He only knew that he was the youngest junior brother of Ninth Summit, the youngest junior brother whom his three senior brothers had to protect forever. With a smile on his face, Su Ming looked at his smug second senior brother and said softly, Second senior brother, you showed off your brilliance in this battle. As second senior brother laughed, a long arc charged over from the distance. Before that figure closed in, Hu Zi's voice rang out like thunder. Mother asterisk her, this battle is delightful. Eldest senior brother, second senior brother, look at how many Hu Zi killed in this battle. As Hu Zi spoke, he closed in on Su Ming, but the instant he closed in, his voice came to an abrupt halt. He saw Su Ming. Junior brother. Hu Zi's footsteps came to a halt, and he looked at Su Ming. Then, he strode forward quickly and hugged Su Ming. You, do you know how many times second senior brother went to Death Vortex and watched silently after you disappeared? Do you know how many times eldest senior brother wanted to break through his cultivation at all costs, so that you would not always be walking between life and death in the future? Do you know how many days I haven't slept to set up the rune? Youngest junior brother, if you listen to me, then don't leave after you come back this time. Can't we gather together for a long time in the Ninth Summit? As Hu Zi spoke, the excitement on his face turned into a whimper. In the world outside, he was like a fierce tiger, a ferocious man who would kill without batting an eyelid. Even his smile was filled with a ferociousness, and the murderous aura around him surged into the sky. But before Su Ming, second senior brother, and eldest senior brother, he was like a child, a tiger who loved to laugh, cry, and peep at others. Second senior brother was silent for a moment before he looked at Su Ming. Youngest junior brother, are you still going to leave this time? Eldest senior brother might not have spoken, but at that moment, he gave off a feeling that he was also waiting for Su Ming's answer. Su Ming was silent. He did not speak. He looked at his eldest senior brother, second senior brother, and Hu Zi. After a long while, he nodded slowly. Once I deal with the final three matters, I will return to Ninth Summit. I will not leave it for 100 years. Night. It was night in Ninth Summit. The galaxy stretched 10,000 leagues, and it was dazzling. The battle during the day had already ended. At that moment, most of the cultivators were resting and meditating. Only a small number of them were swiftly repairing the rune so that the gap in it would slowly close up. Moonlight shone on Ninth Summit. Eldest senior brother sat at the head of the table, second senior brother to the left, Hu Zi to the right, and Su Ming to the end. This was a gathering of the masters. There was no hierarchy based on the strength of their levels of cultivation, and neither was there a ranking system for the members of Ninth Summit. There were only seats that existed according to the time they had joined the sect. The eldest senior brother was like the master. If the master was not around, then eldest senior brother would be the master of the sect. Behind Su Ming was Tsang Lan, who accompanied him quietly. With an indifferent and elegant expression, she did not pay any attention to Su Hui, who was by Su Ming's side. Su Hui had long since returned to Ninth Summit. Su Ming did not ask about Deshan, and she did not talk about it either. Ninth Summit won this battle, but the prerequisite for us to win was that the overall level of cultivation of the cultivators from Dark Dawn and St. Fire was suppressed. Youngest junior brother, did you do this? Second senior brother hesitated for a moment. He simply could not think of any other answer. When he spoke, he looked at Su Ming. Su Ming's expression was calm. He nodded. Hu Zi instantly sucked in a sharp breath and stared at Su Ming in a daze. Second senior brother's breathing quickened as well. His expression changed swiftly, and there was a hint of disbelief in it. They knew clearly what it meant to suppress the overall level of cultivation of the cultivators from Dark Dawn and St. Fire. In fact, it indirectly showed that Su Ming had the power to destroy all the cultivators from Dark Dawn and St. Fire who had descended. Eldest senior brother was silent, but his right hand trembled. It was a telling sign that a huge storm had raged in his heart at that moment. Among the three of them, the one with the highest level of cultivation had always been his eldest senior brother. Perhaps second senior brother could not notice the existence of the sovereign of Dawn Yanpei, and it was even more difficult for Hu Zi to know about it. However, eldest senior brother, who had come into contact with the predecessor of Dao Ocean and had fused with it, could clearly sense that there was an existence that was terrifying to him in the battle. It was the sovereign of Dawn Yanpei. Eldest senior brother had obtained this person's identity and name from the soul search he performed on the captured cultivators from Dark Dawn. He had managed to seal 6/10 of the cultivation bases of the cultivators from Dark Dawn and St. Fire while the sovereign of Dawn Yanpei was around. This sort of power had already surpassed eldest senior brother's imagination. Youngest junior brother, what level of cultivation has your current level of cultivation reached? How are you compared to the sovereign of Dawn Yanpei? Second senior brother was silent for a moment before he asked in a muffled and grave voice. Su Ming was silent for a moment before he answered honestly, doesn't have the right to be my opponent. Besides some ancient monsters sleeping in the four great true worlds in arid triad expanse cosmos, there should be very few cultivators who can be my opponent. When Su Ming said these words, eldest senior brother fell silent. Second senior brother's breathing quickened. Hu Zi's mouth fell open, but he could not say anything even after a long time had passed. They did not doubt Su Ming's words in the slightest. Excitement and exhilaration immediately appeared on Hu Zi's face. He picked up the pot of wine in front of him and drank a huge mouthful from it, then allowed the wine to flow down the corners of his mouth. Youngest junior brother, what should we do next? Why don't we kill all the cultivators from Dark Dawn and St. Fire who descended? What do you think, second senior brother? What do you think of my idea? Is there something suspicious about Dark Dawn and St. Fire? A contemplative look appeared on second senior brother's face. He did not bother with Hu Zi, but instead looked at Su Ming with a contemplative expression. Dark Dawn and St. Fire are also arid triad. This battle might seem like an invasion, but it's actually a return. It might seem dangerous, but it's the final madness in their lives. They think that they are chess players, but they don't know that they were destined to be chess pieces a long time ago. Even if we chase them out and kill all of them, it will be useless because Arid Triad's disaster will not happen now, but 500 years later. When Su Ming said those words slowly, he sighed softly and told them about some of his experiences. It included the disaster 500 years later, harmonious Morris Alba expands cosmos, and the existences of the ancient monsters who would wake up before the disaster. His voice echoed in the air, causing Hu Zi's heart to tremble and disbelief to appear on his face. Second senior brother shuddered, and his eyes sparkled. Youngest junior brother, what are the three things you mentioned just now? When Hu Zi and second senior brother fell silent and digested the shocking truth, eldest senior brother spoke in a muffled voice. Su Ming lifted his head and stared at his eldest senior brother. The first thing I want to do is to go to the Emperor of Abyss True World and find a woman there. I'll go there to take back my true world and give him something. I'll go there and end a grudge that has been bothering me for 1,000 years. Is it you, Xian? Fong Xianji Lan suddenly asked. Su Hui had been silent since the start. No one knew what she was thinking about. At that moment, when she lifted her head, she also looked at Su Ming. Su Ming nodded. Fong Xianji Lan did not say anything. Her expression remained as calm as water, but her eyelashes, which were slightly shut, quivered slightly. The second thing I want to do is to go to an old haunt that will make me stronger and make all preparations for the disaster 500 years later. When Su Ming said those words, a fierce, brilliant light shone in his eyes. The third thing I want to do is to go to Dark Dawn's camp and find our master. At the instant Su Ming said those words, Huzi lifted his head swiftly. Second senior brother's expression also immediately changed. Eldest senior brother was silent, but a determined look appeared on his face. Our levels of cultivation are not enough for us to find our master. Only you can bring him back. It has been a long, long time since we saw him. Eldest senior brother's voice echoed in the area, and there was a deep longing in his voice. Su Ming did not say that he had another goal besides searching for his master in Dark Dawn's camp. He wanted to go to the Spiritlings and see his mother's homeland. Once I finish doing these three things, I will stay in the 9th summit and wait for time to pass. I will wait for the day the disaster arrives. I made a promise to some people in my life, and in the next few hundred years, I will fulfill these promises one by one. Chapter 1402, such as Chong He, Flame Fiend's progenitor, the 100,000 cultivators in Divine Essence Star Ocean, and many more. Su Ming had promised them in the past, and he had not forgotten about them. He would fulfill them one by one, just like Chong He and Flame Fiend's progenitor. When Su Ming saw 9th Summit, he had already noticed that they had joined at some unknown point in time, but very few people knew about their relationship with Su Ming. There are only 500 years left, huh? After remaining silent for a while, second senior brother suddenly smiled. His smile was as gentle as ever, but at that moment, there was a ferociousness and an unwillingness to admit defeat contained within it. Since there are only 500 years left, youngest junior brother, it doesn't matter whether you succeed or not. During those 500 years, perhaps we can clash against the world and the outside world and create even more exciting things. Second senior brother picked up his pot of wine and finished it in one gulp. Once he put it down, he threw his head back and laughed. In silence, Huzi also picked up another pot of wine. Once he finished it in big gulps, he tossed it down the mountain. A solemn look that had never appeared on his face before appeared on his face. Darn it all, 500 years is enough. During these 500 years, I swear that I will definitely find a wife. Huzi's words echoed in the air. Second senior brother was filled with fighting spirit, but when he heard Huzi's words, he was immediately stunned. Most of his fighting spirit was weakened by Huzi, and he smiled wryly. The night passed. On that night, the 4 senior brothers of 9th Summit gathered together, which was a rare sight. They drank a lot of wine and talked about their past, their master, and the berserkers of the past. Fong Canglan stayed by Su Ming's side and watched everything with a smile. Occasionally, she would deliver a pot of wine to Su Ming, as if this was the most important thing in her life. As for Su Hui, she might have been by Su Ming's side that night, but she remained silent, as if there was a wall separating them, and there was a distance between them. It was especially so when she heard Su Ming say that the disaster would descend in another 500 years. She was clearly dazed for a moment, and no one knew what she was thinking about. Su Ming did not ask her about it. There were certain things and certain feelings that needed to be tested. He did not believe that he was a good partner, because the things pressing against his heart were too heavy, so heavy that he could not seem to contain anything else. Fong Canglan walked into Su Ming's heart. With her determination and waiting for him for 1,000-something years, she made Su Ming feel pity for her, and he had no reason to walk away from her. Since he had made his choice, it was a lifetime, regardless of life or death. This was Su Ming's determination. It did not matter whether it was friendship or love, it was the same. That night, he was very happy. Huzi was also very happy. He kept clamoring for a wife and complained that his second senior brother was too frivolous. There were countless women around him. He spoke his mind. He was jealous. He was very, very jealous. But Huzi did not know that his second senior brother's flirtatious ways were just to hide the pain and regret left behind in the depths of his heart from the one and only time he had fallen in love with her, when he was still in the land of berserkers. Su Ming had seen all the things that had happened in the past. He had practically seen the entire process. Eldest brother didn't like to talk, and it was the same that night. He didn't drink, but his body was brimming with the warmth of a brother. It was a warmth that he, in his cold state, didn't have for others. The three people in front of him were all his junior brothers. Any one of them would make him give up his life to protect them. He did not need a woman in his life, and perhaps no woman would be able to accept him without a head. As for his eldest senior brother, he still believed that it was enough for him to have 3 brothers in his life. When morning arrived, the first ray of sunlight appeared in the dimension where the 9th summit was located. Eldest senior brother left to continue his training. Since there were only 500 years left, then he had to make himself stronger during these 500 years. Huzi brought a large number of cultivators from 9th Summit and Life Cultivation Realm cultivators from the Berserkers to form 10,000 cultivators. They went to the world outside and patrolled the area. If there were any remaining cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire, they would crush them. As for his second senior brother, he had even more things to do. He had to handle everything in 9th Summit, especially after he learned about the 500 years. Many plans appeared in his head, and he had to set them up one by one. Only Su Ming was left in 9th Summit. He sat there and stared at the blue sky. Fang Sanlan was by his side. She cast an indifferent glance at Su Ming, then at Su Hui before she lowered her head, turned around, and left. With her intelligence, she could already tell that there seemed to be an indescribable barrier between the woman and Su Ming. The mountain breeze blew past and messed up Su Hui's hair. She sat there quietly, and after a long while, she sighed softly. "Are you still not going to ask me how I dealt with the Shun?" Su Hui bit her bottom lip and looked at Su Ming. Su Ming was silent. He put down the pot of wine and shook his head. "When you want to tell me, even if I don't ask, you will. When you don't want to tell me, even if I ask, it will be difficult for you to speak." Su Hui was silent. After some time, she mumbled, "I didn't kill him. I know." There was no way Su Ming would not know everything that happened in true Morning Dao world. Unless he did not want to know, he would know everything. At that moment, Deshun was on a broken cultivation planet near the edge of the Emperor of Abyss True World in true Morning Dao world. He was staring at the sky, and there was a hint of resentment in his complicated expression. Su Ming had seen it clearly with just a thought. Confusion appeared in Su Hui's eyes. When she heard Su Ming's words, she instinctively wanted to explain herself. But when Su Ming lifted his hand and touched a strand of her hair, her words disappeared. "I know. After all, you are indebted to him, and your memories turned pale at that time." "I understand," Su Ming said calmly. He caressed Su Hui's hair and pulled her into his embrace. When Su Hui touched Su Ming's chest, she suddenly started crying. She had been lost during the past few days, and Shun's face would occasionally appear in her mind, causing her to not know what had happened to her. Yet, during that instant, everything in her mind seemed to have been rearranged while she was in Su Ming's embrace. Her confusion disappeared, and in its place was a deep wave of fatigue. Gradually, she fell asleep. 500 years later, if Su Ming succeeded, then perhaps everything would be perfect, but if he failed, then everything was bound to disappear in the disaster. Since there were only 500 years left, then why should they make each other suffer? It would be better to wipe away that memory. This method was a little domineering, but Su Ming's personality had always contained a domineering side. Time trickled by, and in the blink of an eye, 3 months went by. During them, Su Ming stayed in 9th Summit with Song Lan and Su Hui. The 3 of them watched the sun rise and sat in a rare moment of peace. A wave of warmth filled the air, causing Huzi to be incredibly envious. Occasionally, he would sweep his gaze across the many female cultivators in 9th Summit, as if he was in heat. During the 3 months, besides Songlan and Su Hui, Su Ming and his senior brothers drank together practically every single day. In the midst of laughter that made them temporarily forget all their troubles, Su Ming used his great cultivation base and will to give pointers to Hu Zi and his second senior brother in his level of cultivation. He also helped eldest senior brother gain a better understanding of antecedental spirits, and his fusion with the predecessor of Dao Ocean became much faster. This fusion was of the predecessor of Dao Ocean's own will. Su Ming did not ask what had happened between eldest senior brother and the predecessor of Dao Ocean. He only knew that if his eldest senior brother wanted to become stronger, then he would do his best to achieve it. During the 3 months in the world outside, the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire continued descending, but Ninth Summit turned into a forbidden ground for them. No one dared to invade it anymore, and it was also a forbidden area. All cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire were forbidden from stepping into it. Once they stepped into the territory belonging to Ninth Summit, the cultivation bases of the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire would immediately be reduced by 6/10. This was a warning. Ninth Summit was still the supreme ruler of true Morning Dao world. In fact, even if they went out and ran into cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire, most of them would choose to retreat in silence. The battle 3 months ago had already decided the fate of the world. Compared to the peace in true Morning Dao world, an intense battle had erupted in true Sacredine world. It was a devastating battle, and true Sacredine world's rune was damaged as the price. It might have caused some damage to Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire, but to the ever-growing Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire, these losses were nothing. As true Sacredine world's rune crumbled, a large number of cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire surged in, causing true Sacredine world to change masters. On the other hand, as the fourth true world continued fighting back, a stalemate had started appearing. The reason for this was because powerful warriors who had never been heard of would occasionally appear in the fourth true world and control the situation of the war in a small area. However, as more powerful warriors appeared, the area they controlled was no longer just a small area, but the entire battlefield. Only the Emperor of Abyss true world was the calmest. The cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire who entered seemed to have completely fused with the Emperor of Abyss true world and disappeared without a trace. Another month passed. Su Ming went out and went to the All Spirits Hall in true Morning Dao world. Half a month later, when he returned, he did not seem to be any different, but only Su Ming knew that at the moment he walked out of the All Spirits Hall, a great and astonishing will seem to have gathered together from all of Arid Triad. It turned into an eye, and for the first time ever, it focused its gaze on Su Ming without holding anything back. It was the gaze of Arid Triad's will, because Su Ming's strength when he walked out of the All Spirits Hall was enough to make the slumbering Arid Triads will instinctively become wary. 5 complete spirit ascensions were equivalent to 10. This was not something that had never happened before in Harmonious Morris Alba's complete expanse cosmos. After all, Su Ming was not the first to know about the All Spirits Hall, and neither was he the first to enter Harmonious Morris Alba expanse cosmos. Besides, the All Spirits Hall had existed for countless eons. However, Su Ming was definitely the strongest person in his Aeon. He was the strongest person at that moment. The second update is here, and there's still the third update, but it's going to be a little late. I have to rest, or else it'll be very strenuous for me to continue writing, and my head will be buzzing, making it difficult for me to type. Please forgive me. I asked for double monthly votes. Chapter 1403. Su Ming did not choose to retreat when Arid Triads will stared at him. Instead, he stared at it for a long time, waiting for the disaster of the antecedental spirit to descend, but it did not come. The sleeping Arid Triads will stared at Su Ming for a moment before it gradually disappeared. Su Ming's expression was indifferent. He had never intended to hide his existence. Right then, Dark Dawn and Saint D Fire definitely knew about him, and it was about time for Arid Triad to learn about him. Once he returned to Ninth Summit, another month passed, and Su Ming chose to leave. This time, he did not leave quietly. Instead, as his eldest senior brothers sent him off, and as Fong Song-lan and Su Hui watched him quietly, he gradually left into the distance to complete his second task, to settle the grudge that had surrounded him for 1,000 years. He also wanted to break the shadow cast on him by the scene in the secrets of the universe. It's about time for this to end. Su Xianyi, do you truly not want to take back the fifth kiln where your wife is? Why did you keep it with me? Su Ming turned his head around and cast a glance at the people from Ninth Summit. When he turned around, he took a step forward, and as he mumbled under his breath, he disappeared without a trace. When he reappeared, he was at the border between True Morning Tao World and the Emperor of Abyss True World. There was a broken cultivation planet in the distance, and Shun was there. Su Ming did not bother about that person. He stared at the barrier between the Emperor of Abyss True World and True Morning Tao World. It was a barrier. Behind it was the Emperor of Abyss True World, and beyond it was True Morning Tao World. It was precisely because of it that the four great true worlds had not fought too intensely over the course of countless years. In the past, Su Ming did not have the right to break the barrier. Yu Xian had only come to True Morning Tao World from the Emperor of Abyss True World because of the Abyss Dragon. As he stared at the True World, Su Ming lifted his right hand and swung it. Immediately, two long arcs flew out from his storage bag. One of them was the Abyss Dragon, and the other was the bald crane. The Abyss Dragon's injuries had mostly recovered. Once it appeared, it was about to speak, but it was immediately slapped by the bald crane by its side. The bald crane stared at Su Ming with a resentful look on its face. That resentful gaze made it look as if it had turned into a resentful wife who had stayed in her room for a long time, and it was blaming Su Ming for not letting it come out of that accursed storage bag for a long time. In the past, as long as the bald crane wanted to, it could appear, but as Su Ming's level of cultivation became stronger and his will became greater, the bald crane could no longer appear at will. It could only wait passively for Su Ming to summon it. This sort of feeling made the bald crane feel that it had turned into a resentful woman. Its daily life consisted of counting crystals, sleeping, and beating up the Abyss Dragon. Then it would count crystals, sleep, and beat up the Abyss Dragon again. The cycle repeated itself day by day. Gradually, the Abyss Dragon could no longer endure it. It fought back and struggled fiercely, but it was still unable to escape from its predestined fate. When it came out, tears fell from the Abyss Dragon's eyes, but before it could speak, the bald crane slapped it, and the grievance in its heart reached its peak. Su Ming, the bald crane screeched. If it had feathers, all of them would have definitely stood up at that moment, and its fighting spirit would have been high. Right then, it did not have any feathers, but there was still great anger coming from its body. As it echoed in the air, it set off the bald crane's gigantic figure. Why you? How many days did you lock me up again? Heavens! How many days has it been? I can't even remember how many days have passed. I can't see sunlight. I can't see the galaxy. I can't see other people's crystals. This is torture. This is the greatest torture to me. Su Ming, you're going overboard. I fought with you over the years, and I've gone through countless dangers with you. I've even saved your life countless times. But what about you? You. The bald crane shuddered. When it roared in anger, Su Ming touched his nose, and an awkward expression appeared on his face. He had indeed forgotten about the bald crane. After all, when he was in harmonious Morris Alba expanse cosmos, Su Ming had been shaken by the truth he learned. The series of things had rushed together, causing him to overlook many other things. Only when he came to this place and saw the Emperor of Abyss True World did he remember that the bald crane had been kept in the storage bag for a long time. Darn it! As the bald crane roared in anger, Su Ming immediately lifted his right hand, and a crystal appeared on his palm. You, don't even think about using a crystal to make me move. The great bald crane, will definitely not submit to a crystal. At the instant the bald crane saw the crystal in Su Ming's hand, its eyes immediately went wide. This was the first crystal it had seen over the past few days. It might only be one, but it was someone else's crystal. As long as it was someone else's crystal, even if it was just one, the bald crane would not think that it was too little. That was why when it roared, its eyes betrayed it. Its gaze was fixed on Su Ming, as if he dared to put away the crystal, it would rush up and fight him with its life on the line. You're going too far. One crystal, this crystal. As the bald crane spoke, a conflicted look appeared on its face. Its roars immediately became much weaker, and struggle as well as chaos appeared in its eyes. It was as if its consciousness had been split into two and was fighting fiercely. I want to go to the Emperor of Abyss True World. I promise you that I will give you all the crystals in this true world. What do you say? Su Ming saw that the bald crane had not seen anyone else's crystals for far too long while it was in conflict, which was why it looked like it was about to make a mess. Don't even think about it. Darn it all, what did you say? You said you'll give me a true world's worth of crystals? The great bald crane, will absolutely not submit. The bald crane's saliva was already dripping down its face. It instinctively took a few steps forward and almost instinctively put on a fawning expression, but it stopped itself, just as it was about to emphasize its disdain and agree to it reluctantly. Su Ming sighed. The bald crane's heart immediately let out a thump, and it instantly panicked, afraid that Su Ming would go back on his word. Just as it was about to pounce on him, it saw a scene that it would never be able to forget, one that had shocked it for nearly its entire life. To a true world's will, what were crystals? They were things that could be born in space with just a divine thought from its will. It was something that could be compared to a mortal's ability to turn stone into gold with the touch of a finger. It was using its will to create crystals. Su Ming only swept his will through the area, and immediately, countless crystals appeared around him, the bald crane, and a large area in the galaxy. The sparkling stones stunned the bald crane during that instant. It was completely shocked, especially when it saw that Su Ming had not brought out those crystals from his storage bag, because in truth, it knew even better than him just how many crystals he had. How did you get all these? The bald crane instinctively asked in a daze. I made them. At the instant Su Ming answered the question, the bald crane screeched and pounced on him, hugging his thigh tightly. Thigh, from now on, you're my thigh. Even if you lock me up for 10,000 years, I'll accept it. I won't have a single complaint. Thigh, give me more. Can you turn me into a crystal crane? My thighs, can you give me double monthly votes? Chapter 1404. The bald crane's eyes sparkled, as if it was looking forward to the day it would turn into a crystal crane. When it remembered Su Ming's method of turning crystals into crystals, the bald crane immediately forgot that it was just an illusion. Instead, it felt its blood boil, and, as it shuddered, it became so excited that it was about to start crying out. In the bald crane's eyes, the greatest divine ability in the world was none other than the art Su Ming had cast just now. The ability to make crystals appear out of thin air was something the bald crane could only dream of. In its opinion, this was the strongest divine ability in the world. Even Su Ming himself did not know just how great of an impact his art had brought to the bald crane. It was a desire that could make the bald crane risk everything to obtain it. Su Ming let out a fake cough. He had intentionally displayed this divine ability in front of the bald crane, and in the end, its resentment had dissipated. At that moment, as he looked at the incredibly excited bald crane, Su Ming had a vague feeling that he had gone a little overboard. He had actually made the bald crane request to turn itself into a crystal crane. Hence, he quickly averted his gaze and no longer bothered with the Chinese person. Instead, he cast his gaze on the barrier between True Morning Dao World and the Emperor of Abyss True World. When he did so, a sharp light shone in his eyes. A brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes, and the bald crane immediately noticed it. It turned around to cast a glance at the barrier, and a thought appeared in its head. This was a chance for it to curry favor with Su Ming. As long as it could make Su Ming happy, he would turn it into crystals every day, and that would be the greatest happiness in its life. When it thought of this, the bald crane became excited again, but it forced it down and put on an expression filled with righteous indignation. That's it? It dares to stop Sir Su Ming? Damn it. How dare it stop the great, omnipotent Sir Su Ming who can make crystals appear? I'll fight it to the death. Great anger appeared on the bald crane's face. As it roared, it turned its back towards Su Ming and continued sending signals to the abyss dragon with its eyes. In its mind, if the abyss dragon also expressed its anger, the effects would be even better. After all, in the bald crane's mind, the abyss dragon was its follower and one of the dual fiends of black and yellow in the past. The abyss dragon was momentarily stunned before it instinctively spoke. What is the meaning of this? As it spoke, the abyss dragon blinked and mimicked the bald crane's gaze. It had indeed not understood what the bald crane meant. Why had it suddenly become angry when it was originally very excited? The abyss dragon hunched its neck when it saw the bald crane's change in expression. It found the bald crane to be very terrifying, especially during the days it was in the storage bag. It had to be abused by the bald crane every single day to kill time, and the more it thought about it, the more it felt that its brain could not catch up to the bald crane's thoughts. When the bald crane saw the dumbfounded look on the abyss dragon's face, it was instantly enraged. Just as it was about to roar, Su Ming took a step forward and instantly appeared beside the barrier. He lifted his right hand and touched the invisible barrier lightly. Shatter. When Su Ming said those words flatly, his right hand touched the barrier, and a loud bang shook the sky and earth. It reverberated through half of True Morning Tao World, then half of the Emperor of Abyss True World, and it spread out violently. As the sound traveled through the air, the bald crane immediately gave up on the thought of causing trouble to the abyss dragon. There was a ferocious look on its face, as if wherever Su Ming pointed, it would charge forward with an indomitable will. It rushed forward and rammed its head against the barrier. To show off and make Su Ming give it crystals, the bald crane had indeed fought with everything it had. But the instant it touched the barrier, or rather, the instant it was about to touch the barrier, the invisible barrier between True Morning Tao World and the Emperor of Abyss True World manifested a membrane that looked like it had light flowing in it. That membrane shuddered rapidly, and cracking sounds instantly rang out. Cracks instantly spread out from the spot where Su Ming's right hand touched the barrier. Su Ming did not move. His long hair floated in the air casually, and even his white long robe danced in the air. His expression was indifferent, and not a hint of anything else could be seen on his face. He watched as the cracks spread through the entire barrier. As they spread out layer by layer, they looked like a spider web. Then, with a bang, the barrier shattered to pieces and turned into countless shards that spilled towards the Emperor of Abyss True World. From the distance, they looked like flying snow. The shards of the barrier looked like they could reflect a brilliant light. They were like starlight in the galaxy, and at that moment, when they swept through the galaxy, they looked like an ocean of stars. The barrier that existed between the two true worlds had only occasionally had small gaps appear, but had never completely crumbled. On that day, it shattered completely. What shattered was not just this region, but the entire ring-shaped barrier. During that instant, it shattered to pieces in different spots. All of this might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, it had happened in an instant. When the bald crane crashed into the barrier, it did not touch it. Instead, when the barrier tumbled backwards and collapsed, it crashed into the barrier as well. Let's go. I will give you double the amount of crystals you can get from the Emperor of Abyss True World. With a smile on his face, Su Ming cast a glance at the bald crane. It had been with him for more than 1,000 years, and it could be said that it had already become his family. Su Ming valued his relationships, and it was the same for the bald crane. At the instant Su Ming's words landed in the bald crane's ears, it became excited again. It shuddered and let out a few loud roars before appearing on the abyss dragon's body. The abyss dragon was so terrified that its heart shuddered, but soon after, the bald crane whispered a few words to the abyss dragon, and light instantly shone in the abyss dragon's eyes. That light was not the bald crane's sparkling light. Instead, it was a light that made Su Ming feel a little dirty. The abyss dragon trembled in excitement and asked, "Boss, is what you said true?" "Duh, of course it's true. Well, have I ever lied to you?" The bald crane immediately said, as if it was making a promise. "Are you really going to give me all the female dragons?" "All right, I'll give it my all." The abyss dragon's eyes turned bloodshot. With a loud roar, it brought the bald crane and charged towards the abyss dragon's true world. The bald crane cried out in excitement. When it passed by Su Ming, it immediately lifted its claw and swung at him. "Tell me, you'll give me as many crystals as I can get. Just you wait. If there is even a single crystal left in this true world, it'll be because I don't have the ability." The bald crane's words were still echoing in the air when it disappeared into the distance as the abyss dragon charged forward. It wanted to leave Su Ming and search for crystals on its own. It did this because it was afraid that Su Ming would throw it back into his storage bag again. Su Ming watched the bald crane leave into the distance and smiled faintly. He could tell what the bald crane was thinking with just one glance, but with his current level of cultivation, he could let the bald crane do whatever it wanted, even if this was the Emperor of Abyss True World. But soon, this place would no longer belong to the Emperor of Abyss True World. It would belong to Su Ming. The immortal sex will had collapsed in harmonious Morris Alba, Expanse Cosmos, and Su Ming's will had appeared. Su Ming still remembered it. At that moment, when he took a step forward and stepped into the territory of the Emperor of Abyss True World, the entire Emperor of Abyss True World shuddered. As it did so, countless ripples appeared out of nowhere in the galaxy. They spread out in all directions and filled the entire galaxy. At the same time, a roar that all the lives in the true world could hear echoed in the true world. There was a hint of madness in that roar, along with deep fear and an unwillingness to admit defeat. At the instant it spread out, it sounded like the strongest struggle of some life before it died. When it reverberated through the entire true world, there was clearly a powerful abyss death aura contained within that struggling roar. That aura was different from the aura of death. There was a hint of intelligence in it, but there was also a corrosive air to it, as if it could corrupt all lives. It caused the entire Emperor of Abyss True World to tremble violently. The tremors caused the hearts of all the lives in the Emperor of Abyss True World to tremble. The ferocious beasts unique to the Emperor of Abyss True World and the countless planets threw their heads back and let out forlorn roars. They prostrated themselves on the ground, as if they could sense death approaching them as the true world trembled. It was the same for the cultivators. No matter what they were doing, no matter what level of cultivation they had, as long as they were lives born in the Emperor of Abyss True World, all of them felt ill at ease at that moment. Their cultivation bases became chaotic, as if they were about to cough up blood from their bodies. The higher their levels of cultivation, the stronger this feeling became. There were no sects in the Emperor of Abyss True World. Instead, it was ruled by families that formed a dynasty. Among them, the Emperor of Abyss True World had the highest status. Under him were 8 great kings of Abyss and 36 generals of Abyss. They ruled over countless armor cultivators in the abyssal world. Each of the kings of Abyss belonged to a large family, and it was the same for the generals of Abyss. Above the Emperor of Abyss True World was the Sublime Paragon. Among the 4 great true worlds, only the Sublime Paragon of the Emperor of Abyss True World was worshipped by the cultivators in the other true worlds, and only the Emperor of Abyss True World had an Abyss Paragon Palace that belonged to the Sublime Paragon. Almost at the same time, the true world trembled. The hearts of all the families in the Emperor of Abyss True World trembled. There were even quite a number of powerful warriors who spread out their powerful presences and swept through the area in an attempt to find the reason for the true world's tremors. The Emperor of Abyss True World was dressed in an imperial robe. He was a middle-aged man with an awe-inspiring face. He was staring coldly at the cultivators in the hall who were mocking each other. These people were discussing the large number of cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Defire who had appeared in the Emperor of Abyss True World. As he listened to the increasingly obvious mockery of these people, the Emperor of Abyss frowned. Enough, this is something decided by the Lord Sublime Paragon. What's the point of all of you discussing it here? The Emperor of Abyss said coldly. When he spoke, the cultivators beneath him looked towards him. If you have any objections, you can request an audience with the Lord Sublime Paragon. Don't ruin my mood to witness my son's wedding. The Emperor of Abyss frowned. At that moment, the person in the hall was his clone. His real body was in the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss True World, watching the grand wedding. At that moment, he did not want to waste any more time in this place. He stood up, and when he spoke, he was about to leave. Suddenly, his body shook violently. The expressions of the cultivators in the hall also changed in an instant. A strong tremor filled their minds. The pain that came from the invisible roar seemed to be spreading to every living being in the other world. Chapter 1405. The bald crane's eyes sparkled, as if it was looking forward to the day it would turn into a crystal crane. When it remembered Su Ming's method of turning crystals into crystals, the bald crane immediately forgot that it was just an illusion. Instead, it felt its blood boil, and as it shuddered, it became so excited that it was about to start crying out. In the bald crane's eyes, the greatest divine ability in the world was none other than the art Su Ming had cast just now. The ability to make crystals appear out of thin air was something the bald crane could only dream of. In its opinion, this was the strongest divine ability in the world. Even Su Ming himself did not know just how great of an impact his art had brought to the bald crane. It was a desire that could make the bald crane risk everything to obtain it. Su Ming let out a fake cough. He had intentionally displayed this divine ability in front of the bald crane, and in the end, its resentment had dissipated. At that moment, as he looked at the incredibly excited bald crane, Su Ming had a vague feeling that he had gone a little overboard. He had actually made the bald crane request to turn itself into a crystal crane. Hence, he quickly averted his gaze and no longer bothered with the Chinese person. Instead, he cast his gaze on the barrier between True Morning Tao World and the Emperor of Abyss True World. When he did so, a sharp light shone in his eyes. A brilliant light shone in Su Ming's eyes, and the bald crane immediately noticed it. It turned around to cast a glance at the barrier, and a thought appeared in its head. This was a chance for it to curry favor with Su Ming. As long as it could make Su Ming happy, he would turn it into crystals every day, and that would be the greatest happiness in its life. When it thought of this, the bald crane became excited again, but forced it down and put on an expression filled with righteous indignation. That's it? It dares to stop Sir Su Ming? Damn it. How dare it stop the great, omnipotent Sir Su Ming who can make crystals appear? I'll fight it to the death. Great anger appeared on the bald crane's face. As it roared, it turned its back towards Su Ming and continued sending signals to the Abyss Dragon with its eyes. In its mind, if the Abyss Dragon also expressed its anger, the effects would be even better. After all, in the bald crane's mind, the Abyss Dragon was its follower and one of the dual fiends of black and yellow in the past. The Abyss Dragon was momentarily stunned before it instinctively spoke. What is the meaning of this? As it spoke, the Abyss Dragon blinked and mimicked the bald crane's gaze. It had indeed not understood what the bald crane meant. Why had it suddenly become angry when it was originally very excited? The Abyss Dragon hunched its neck when it saw the bald crane's change in expression. It found the bald crane to be very terrifying, especially during the days it was in the storage bag. It had to be abused by the bald crane every single day to kill time, and the more it thought about it, the more it felt that its brain could not catch up to the bald crane's thoughts. When the bald crane saw the dumbfounded look on the Abyss Dragon's face, it was instantly enraged. Just as it was about to roar, Su Ming took a step forward and instantly appeared beside the barrier. He lifted his right hand and touched the invisible barrier lightly. Shatter! When Su Ming said those words flatly, his right hand touched the barrier, and a loud bang shook the sky and earth. It reverberated through half of true morning Tao world, then half of the Emperor of Abyss true world, and it spread out violently. As the sound traveled through the air, the bald crane immediately gave up on the thought of causing trouble to the Abyss dragon. There was a ferocious look on its face, as if wherever Su Ming pointed, it would charge forward with an indomitable will. It rushed forward and rammed its head against the barrier. To show off and make Su Ming give it crystals, the bald crane had indeed fought with everything it had. But the instant it touched the barrier, or rather, the instant it was about to touch the barrier, the invisible barrier between true Morning Tao world and the Emperor of Abyss true world manifested into a membrane that looked like it had light flowing in it. That membrane shuddered rapidly, and cracking sounds instantly rang out. Cracks instantly spread out from the spot where Su Ming's right hand touched the barrier. Su Ming did not move. His long hair floated in the air casually, and even his white long robe danced in the air. His expression was indifferent, and not a hint of anything else could be seen on his face. He watched as the cracks spread through the entire barrier. As they spread out layer by layer, they looked like a spider web. Then, with a bang, the barrier shattered to pieces and turned into countless shards that spilled towards the Emperor of Abyss true world. From the distance, they looked like flying snow. The shards of the barrier looked like they could reflect a brilliant light. They were like starlight in the galaxy, and at that moment, when they swept through the galaxy, they looked like an ocean of stars. The barrier that existed between the two true worlds had only occasionally had small gaps appear, but had never completely crumbled. On that day, it shattered completely. What shattered was not just this region, but the entire ring-shaped barrier. During that instant, it shattered to pieces in different spots. All of this might have seemed to have happened over a long period of time, but in truth, it had happened in an instant. When the bald crane crashed into the barrier, it did not touch it. Instead, when the barrier tumbled backwards and collapsed, it crashed into the barrier as well. Let's go. I will give you double the amount of crystals you can get from the Emperor of Abyss True World. With a smile on his face, Su Ming cast a glance at the bald crane. It had been with him for more than 1,000 years, and it could be said that it had already become his family. Su Ming valued his relationships, and it was the same for the bald crane. At the instant Su Ming's words landed in the bald crane's ears, it became excited again. It shuddered and let out a few loud roars before appearing on the Abyss Dragon's body. The Abyss Dragon was so terrified that its heart shuddered, but soon after, the bald crane whispered a few words to the Abyss Dragon, and light instantly shone in the Abyss Dragon's eyes. That light was not the bald crane's sparkling light. Instead, it was a light that made Su Ming feel a little dirty. The Abyss Dragon trembled in excitement and asked, "Boss, is what you said true?" "Duh, of course it's true. Well, have I ever lied to you?" The bald crane immediately said, as if it was making a promise. "Are you really going to give me all the female dragons?" "All right, I'll give it my all." The Abyss Dragon's eyes turned bloodshot. With a loud roar, it brought the bald crane and charged towards the Abyss Dragon's true world. The bald crane cried out in excitement. When it passed by Su Ming, it immediately lifted its claw and swung at him. "Tell me, you'll give me as many crystals as I can get. Just you wait. If there is even a single crystal left in this true world, it'll be because I don't have the ability." The bald crane's words were still echoing in the air when it disappeared into the distance as the Abyss Dragon charged forward. It wanted to leave Su Ming and search for crystals on its own. It did this because it was afraid that Su Ming would throw it back into his storage bag again. Su Ming watched the bald crane leave into the distance and smiled faintly. He could tell what the bald crane was thinking with just one glance. But with his current level of cultivation, he could let the bald crane do whatever it wanted, even if this was the Emperor of Abyss True World. But soon, this place would no longer belong to the Emperor of Abyss True World. It would belong to Su Ming. The immortal sex will had collapsed in harmonious Morris Alba, expanse cosmos, and Su Ming's will had appeared. Su Ming still remembered it. At that moment, when he took a step forward and stepped into the territory of the Emperor of Abyss True World, The entire Emperor of Abyss true world shuddered. As it did so, countless ripples appeared out of nowhere in the galaxy. They spread out in all directions and filled the entire galaxy. At the same time, a roar that all the lives in the true world could hear echoed in the true world. There was a hint of madness in that roar, along with deep fear and unwillingness to admit defeat. At the instant it spread out, it sounded like the strongest struggle of some life before it died. When it reverberated through the entire true world, there was clearly a powerful abyss death aura contained within that struggling roar. That aura was different from the aura of death. There was a hint of intelligence in it, but there was also a corrosive air to it, as if it could corrupt all lives. It caused the entire Emperor of Abyss true world to tremble violently. The tremors caused the hearts of all the lives in the Emperor of Abyss true world to tremble. The ferocious beasts unique to the Emperor of Abyss true world and the countless planets threw their heads back and let out forlorn roars. They prostrated themselves on the ground, as if they could sense death approaching them as the true world trembled. It was the same for the cultivators. No matter what they were doing, no matter what level of cultivation they had, as long as they were lives born in the Emperor of Abyss true world, all of them felt ill at ease at that moment. Their cultivation bases became chaotic, as if they were about to cough up blood from their bodies. The higher their levels of cultivation, the stronger this feeling became. There were no sects in the Emperor of Abyss true world. Instead, it was ruled by families that formed a dynasty. Among them, the Emperor of Abyss true world had the highest status. Under him were 8 great kings of Abyss and 36 generals of Abyss. They ruled over countless armor cultivators in the abyssal world. Each of the kings of Abyss belonged to a large family, and it was the same for the generals of Abyss. Above the Emperor of Abyss true world was the sublime paragon. Among the 4 great true worlds, only the sublime paragon of the Emperor of Abyss true world was worshipped by the cultivators in the other true worlds, and only the Emperor of Abyss true world had an Abyss Paragon Palace that belonged to the sublime paragon. Almost at the same time, the true world trembled. The hearts of all the families in the Emperor of Abyss true world trembled. There were even quite a number of powerful warriors who spread out their powerful presences and swept through the area in an attempt to find the reason for the true world's tremors. The Emperor of Abyss true world was dressed in an imperial robe. He was a middle-aged man with an awe-inspiring face. He was staring coldly at the cultivators in the hall who were mocking each other. These people were discussing the large number of cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Defire who had appeared in the Emperor of Abyss true world. As he listened to the increasingly obvious mockery of these people, the Emperor of Abyss frowned. Enough. This is something decided by the Lord Sublime Paragon. What's the point of all of you discussing it here? The Emperor of Abyss said coldly. When he spoke, the cultivators beneath him looked towards him. If you have any objections, you can request an audience with the Lord Sublime Paragon. Don't ruin my mood to witness my son's wedding. The Emperor of Abyss frowned. At that moment, the person in the hall was his clone. His real body was in the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss true world, watching the grand wedding. At that moment, he did not want to waste any more time in this place. He stood up, and when he spoke, he was about to leave. Suddenly, his body shook violently. The expressions of the cultivators in the hall also changed in an instant. A strong tremor filled their minds. The pain that came from the invisible roar seemed to be spreading to every living being in the other world. Chapter 1406. It was especially so for the Emperor of Abyss, who had the highest level of cultivation in the hall. At the instant he stood up, he coughed up a mouthful of blood, swung his arm, and turned into a long arc that charged out of the hall. What happened? Behind him, the faces of the other cultivators in the hall turned pale. Blood trickled down the corners of 2 people's mouths. Their hearts and veins had been affected by the roars echoing in the true world, and they were injured. This is the true worlds will roar in pain. At the instant the Emperor of Abyss looked at the sky, his face turned pale, and he sucked in a sharp breath. At the same time, The sublime paragon of the Emperor of Abyss True World stood in Abyss Paragon Palace. He was dressed in a long purple robe, and his face would occasionally change. In one breath, he would be a teenager, and in the next breath, he would be an old man. In the middle, he would occasionally be a middle-aged man. He stood there with a respectful expression. Before him was Su Xian Yi, who was meditating with a calm expression. Dressed in a white robe, Su Xian Yi looked at the chessboard in front of him with an indifferent expression. He held a black piece in his right hand, and when he placed it down slowly, he looked at a middle-aged man dressed in a black robe across from him. The man had long hair that spilled over his shoulders. There was an air of arrogance about him, along with a powerful, mighty pressure. It caused the sublime paragon of this true world behind Su Xian to feel his heart tremble slightly. To him, the black-robed man was like a fierce tiger, and he had turned into a mortal. Your Grace, Sovereign of Dawn, it's your turn. Once we're done with this game, we should head to my daughter's wedding. The preparations there are almost done. Su Xian Yi smiled faintly. The black-robed man before him was the strongest person who had descended from Dark Dawn's camp, the Sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei. The one who had been scared off by Su Ming in the past was his clone. Right then, the one before him was his real self, but even so, he knew everything about his clone in true Morning Dao world. It became his greatest wariness towards arid triad expanse cosmos, and it was hidden in the depths of his heart. It was precisely because of this that he chose to stay in the Emperor of Abyss True World for a long period of time. Based on his thoughts, the terrifying existence from true Morning Dao world only cared about the Ninth Summit. As long as he did not provoke the Ninth Summit, that terrifying old monster would not cause trouble for him. Otherwise, his clone would not have been able to escape in the past. Through this, he could tell that the other party did not intend to kill him, but even so, he was still slightly anxious. Fortunately, nothing had happened over the past few months, which made him feel slightly at ease, but no matter what, he had made up his mind that he would definitely not go to true Morning Dao world. Yin Pei smiled. There was no joy or anger on his face, and his smile was very faint. He raised his right hand and placed a white piece on the chessboard. Just as he was about to speak, his expression suddenly changed. At that moment, the expression of the sublime paragon beside Su Xian Yi changed swiftly. When he lifted his head, he suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood. He staggered a few steps back and coughed up blood again. His injuries were clearly even worse than the Emperor of Abyss True World, because he was the sublime paragon of this true world, and he was the only sublime paragon. That was why the Emperor of Abyss True Worlds, while roaring in indignation, was the most damaging to him. As for Su Xian Yi, he did not sense anything. He was not a person of this true world. At that moment, he only frowned. He could sense the tremors from the true world outside, and he also noticed that something had happened to the true world's will, and it was roaring. In silence, he closed his eyes. At the instant he did so, his will shot through the endless space and reached the depths of the Emperor of Abyss True World. It was a vortex that was tumbling about like fog at that moment. At the center of the vortex was a figure sitting cross-legged. His appearance was that of Su Xianyi. When he opened his eyes, an ancient and cold look appeared in them. The person in the vortex was his real self, and the person playing chess with the Sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei was his clone. Years ago, I made some adjustments to the essence of the will of this world, and it slowly formed this vortex. Inside of it, a new can be born. That vortex contains my quintessence blood, and as soon as that will is born, it will be able to fuse into my body. Damn it, did something happen? Su Xianyi frowned. He spread his divine sense outwards and swept through the Emperor of Abyss True World, but he did not notice anything off. As for Su Ming, he could not see him. He could only see the Emperor of Abyss True World roaring in pain and struggling, as if its will was being possessed, but no matter how Su Xianyi searched, he could not find any signs of the true world's will being possessed. Could it be that this is because the will in the essence vortex is about to be born? Is that why the Emperor of Abyss True Worlds will is struggling? A pensive look appeared on Su Xianyi's face before he let out a cold harumph and closed his eyes. At the instant he closed his eyes, the sovereign of Abyss in Abyss Paragon Palace opened his eyes. "There's something wrong with this true world's will," the sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei said faintly. His divine sense had already swept through the entire true world, but he did not find anything off. However, he could tell that the Emperor of Abyss True Worlds was swiftly weakening, as if it was swiftly dying. However, even though it was dying quickly, based on this speed, the Emperor of Abyss True World would still need around 100 years before it would truly die. It's fine. This is something that concerns my real self. It has nothing to do with the world outside. Sir Yin Pei, this chess game. Before Su Xianyi could finish speaking, a dark look suddenly appeared on his face. He looked into the distance. His gaze could pierce through space, and he saw the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss True World and the Emperor of Abyss True World. Everything had been prepared by then, and they were just waiting for him to arrive at the grand wedding. This was a very important part of Su Xianyi's plan, which he had been planning for tens of thousands of years. He could not allow any accidents to happen, but now an accident had happened. "I knew that he would show signs of betraying me today." When Su Xianyi said coldly, he stood up, wrapped his fist in his palm, and bowed to Yin Pei. "It was one of my disciples who rebelled against me. He has been with me for many years." "Huh?" Su Xianyi shook his head. "Well said. I understand what you mean, fellow Taoist Su. I will help you kill this person. Treat it as a reward for your cooperation with Dark Dawn's camp. As for the matter regarding Abyss Builders, since I promised you, I will definitely not go back on my word. It is impossible for us to exist in arid triad expanse cosmos for long. In the future, this place will only belong to you. Thank you, Sovereign of Dawn." Su Xianyi bowed deeply to Yin Pei again, but only he could hear the cold laughter in his heart. With Su Xianyi's great talent and bold vision, there was no way he would be willing to be under someone else. Using Dark Dawn's camp was just an expedient measure. It was just a branch of his plan that he needed to make up for because of the divergence in his plans. They were both using each other. Yin Pei knew this as well. He looked at Su Xianyi, who was bowing to him, and laughed coldly in his heart. The person before him was just a chess piece, and he was the player. No matter how important a chess piece was, it was still a chess piece to the player, and it could not cause any trouble. At most, he would just play another game. The Emperor of Abyss True World was the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss True World. It was a gigantic cultivation planet formed by nearly 1,000 planets gathered together by a great divine ability. Even from the distance, it looked incredibly huge. If anyone stood on it, they would feel as if the world was boundless, and they would have the misconception that the galaxy had turned into land. On the gigantic cultivation planet was a boundless sea. At that moment, there were more than 1 million cultivators standing on a gigantic ancient tree that stretched out from the bottom of the sea. They were attending a grand wedding. The ancient tree was so big that each of its leaves was like a field. From the distance, the tree towered into the sky. In fact, there was even a legend in the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss True World that surrounded this ancient tree. It was said that many years ago, the reason why nearly 1,000 planets had gathered together to form this cultivation planet was because they had discovered this ancient tree. It did not seem to have existed in this era, but an even more ancient era. In fact, there were even rumors that this tree should be something left behind from the previous aeon. It had avoided the disaster and survived until then. Of course, the latter rumor was not something a normal cultivator could know. Only the Almighties who had a vague understanding of Arid Triad's history would know about and spread it around, and they believed that it was close to the truth. A moment ago, there were 1 million cultivators gathered on the ancient tree. They were all cultivators from the Emperor of Abyss True World, and they came from various families. They were there to offer their congratulations, because the man in the wedding was the third prince of the Emperor of Abyss True World. Regardless of whether it was his appearance, cultivation base, or birth, This person could be said to have an incredibly high status in the Emperor of Abyss True World. As the son of the Emperor of Abyss, he was also in Mastery Realm. When all of these things were gathered together, the presence they formed was enough to make many people envious. Even though the third prince had some flaws, was once incredibly brutal, and was infamous for being fierce, but that was all in the past. During the past few years, the third prince's personality seemed to have changed. He was no longer brutal, arrogant, and domineering. Instead, he had become completely level-headed. In fact, his appearance had slowly changed along with his personality, and he now looked much more awe-inspiring. It was as if he had grown up completely. This was incredibly obvious, and many people slowly noticed it during that period of time. He appeared to be in Mastery Realm, but all the cultivators in Mastery Realm felt their hearts tremble when they stood before him, as if they were suppressed. Even those in Life Realm felt this way. In fact, even the clan leaders of the 8 great families, who were the King of Abyss, who were in Death Realm, felt as if they were being suppressed when they ran into the third prince. The bride of the wedding ceremony was not a nobody. She was a direct descendant of the King of Abyss blood, whose family had been exterminated in the past. Her name was Yuxian, and she was the woman who had broken off the engagement in the past, but was still standing there. It was extraordinarily lively, filled with a boiling cauldron of voices. Cheers and laughter echoed out. Congratulations came from the various clans and clans. The preparations for the wedding ceremony were complete, and it was time to bloom. However, that was just a moment ago. At that moment, the Emperor of Abyss roared, causing the hearts of all the cultivators in the area to tremble. It was as if the apocalypse had arrived, and the place descended into chaos. Then an ancient roar rose, and an old man whose face was clearly much older than before sliced through the long arc without hesitation. Wherever he went, the world looked as if it was about to be torn apart. He charged to the center and stared at Yuxian in the distance like a puppet. By Yuxian's side was the third prince, who had been watching the chaos around him with a cold gaze and an expressionless face. Last day of the month. Monthly votes. Chapter 1407. October arrived, and quite a lot of the story of begging for demons was revealed. Erytriad would come this month, and 500 years would pass in the blink of an eye. Was the scene in the secrets of the universe real or fake? What would happen to all existences in the end? In October, part of it would be revealed, begging for a guaranteed monthly ticket. Chapter 1408. Yuxian's expression was apathetic, as if she was already used to her fate. She sat there like a puppet and watched the chaos before her, as well as the cultivators' expressions changed. Yuxian did not feel anything about the Emperor of Abyss True Worlds while roaring. It was as if she was not a person of this true world. She looked at the gray-robed old man in the sky who was charging toward her in the form of a long arc wherever he went. He would use the chaos to close in on her in the span of a breath. The old man had a head full of white hair. There was a hint of sadness on his face, but there was also a hint of determination in it. This person was Elder Mo Sang. At that moment, Mo Sang was no longer the young man Su Ming had seen in Morning Dao sect in the past. Instead, he had become an old man, and his appearance was the exact same as the elder in Su Ming's memories. The third prince of this true world sat calmly on his throne. As he watched Mo Sang approach him, a complicated look that no one could see appeared on his face. It was so deep that it seemed to have spread to his soul. With a sigh, the third prince averted his gaze and gave up on lifting his hand. Instead, he closed his eyes. At the instant he did so, Elder Mo Sang had already closed in on Yuxian. "Let's go." Elder Mo Sang grabbed Yuxian's left hand. The resolute look in his eyes reached Yuxian's own, causing her to lift her head and look at him. She shook her head with an apathetic expression. The sadness in Elder Mo Sang's eyes grew stronger. He lifted his left hand and struck the center of Yuxian's brows. Immediately, the apathetic look in Yuxian's eyes shuddered, as if she was struggling against it. At the same time, the elder grabbed Yu Xian and turned into a long arc that charged towards an ancient tree's leaf. There were 3 men in black robes on that leaf at that moment. In the face of the chaos around them, cold expressions appeared on their faces. The light of a relocation rune shone rapidly under their feet. The third prince opened his eyes and quietly watched Imo Sang bring Yu Xian into the distance. He watched the two of them use the chaos around them to instantly close in on the leaf with the relocation rune carved on it. As the light from the rune shone, their bodies became indistinct. With a soft sigh, the third prince mumbled something that only he could hear. The changes in this true world are clearly due to him coming. Almost at the instant the third prince mumbled those words, Elder Imo Sang and Yu Xian's figures on the leaf in the distance had already become so indistinct that they were practically transparent. At the instant they were about to be relocated, a cold harumph rose swiftly in the air with a thunderous boom. At the instant the cold harumph appeared, Su Xian walked out from the sky. Behind him was the sublime paragon of this true world, and beside him was the sovereign of Don Yen Pei, who was dressed in a black robe and had a cold and arrogant expression. The entire world went quiet. The nearly 1 million cultivators on the ancient tree all had pale faces. However, their cultivation bases were no longer in chaos, and their minds were no longer collapsing. Instead, they were just barely able to regain their senses. Heaven and earth seemed to be suppressed by a boundless power. Time reversal. A faint voice tumbled out of Su Xianyi's mouth. There was a supreme, mighty pressure in his voice, as if once he spoke, his words would become law, and no one could question them. At the instant his voice echoed in the air, the relocation rune where Elder Imo Sang and Yu Xian were immediately shuddered. As if time had been reversed, the two people's figures gained corporeal form from their indistinct state. In the blink of an eye, they appeared in the relocation rune again. In fact, right when they appeared in the relocation rune, Elder Imo Sang and Yu Xian immediately moved back in reverse, as if everything that had happened before had been reversed. Elder Imo Sang and Yu Xian moved back to the third prince's side. When Yu Xian sat down again, and the elder moved back to the relocation rune again, Su Xian lifted his right hand while standing in midair and pointed at Elder Imo Sang. Immediately, as time flowed in reverse, the elder's body froze. He looked like he had turned into a stone in a river and did not move. Layers upon layers of threads appeared on his body, binding him up. Those threads were the marks of time. Time continued flowing in reverse, and a near 1 million cultivators in the area also changed. They returned to the pained expressions they had when the true worlds were roared, but soon everything changed. They returned to the time when the true worlds had not roared, and the entire wedding ceremony was lively. Such a divine ability could be said to be astonishing. The area of time reversal might not be big, but it included nearly 1 million cultivators. The shock of this scene appeared on the sublime paragon's face behind Su Xian, causing his breathing to quicken. When he looked at Su Xian, his gaze was filled with great fanaticism and respect. In fact, even the pupils of the sovereign of Don Yen Pei shrank slightly, but soon a smile appeared at the corners of his lips. The stronger the chess piece he chose, the more beneficial it would be for him, as expected of the Abyss Builders. In the past, Great Abyss Tribe was known as one of the 3 great races in ancient Shu, and they stood on equal footing with Great Berserker Tribe and Heavenly Spirit Tribe. There is indeed a reason for that. After the span of a few breaths, the time reversal instantly stopped and returned to normal. It was as if Su Xian had used his divine ability of time to change everything. This is a wedding ceremony, and it cannot be interrupted. Today my daughter is getting married, and I am indebted to all of you, fellow Taoists, for celebrating. I cannot let my mood be dampened. Su Xian smiled faintly, then turned around and wrapped his fist in his palm to bow to the sovereign of Don Yen Pei. Sovereign of Dawn, please. Today, your beloved daughter is getting married, and I'm just a guest. How can I go ahead of you? Fellow Taoist Su, please do not stand on ceremony, the sovereign of Dan Yin Pei said with a laugh. There was a smile on Su Xianyi's face. He did not say anything. Instead, after bowing to the sovereign of Dan Yin Pei, he walked towards the third prince and Yu Xian. When he appeared, Su Xianyi stood in front of Yu Xian and the third prince. The third prince's expression remained the same. When he stood up, Yu Xian also stood up like a puppet whose strings had been pulled. The two of them bowed to Su Xianyi and the sovereign of Dan Yin Pei. The area was silent. The 1 million cultivators in the area were first intimidated by Su Xianyi's divine ability. Even the Emperor of Abyss True World was the same. The third prince might be his son, but he did not seem to have the right to speak or participate in the ceremony. He wanted to go over first, but when the sublime paragon who followed behind Su Xianyi cast him a faint glance, the Emperor of Abyss True World's heart trembled. He quickly stopped and sighed in his heart. To him, this was not his son marrying, but Su Xianyi forcefully using his daughter to marry his son. Su Xianyi first cast a glance at Yu Xian, then at the third prince. A hint of pride appeared on his face. He looked at the third prince before him, and a rare hint of kindness appeared in his smile. However, at the instant that kindness appeared, he looked at Yu Xian, making it difficult for others to tell who that kindness belonged to. Today is the day of the wedding. I will use this item to wish the two newlyweds a happy life together in the path of cultivation. The sovereign of Dan Yin Pei smiled faintly. When he lifted his right hand, 2 bells appeared on his palm, and he placed them in Yu Xian's hands. Thank you, senior, Yu Xian said softly while bowing slightly with an apathetic expression. By her side, the third prince bowed in a steady manner and thanked the sovereign of Dan softly. As the sovereign of Dan Yin Pei looked at Yu Xian, he could tell with just one glance that a lot of seals had been placed on the woman. In fact, even her thoughts and soul had been sealed. When he looked at the third prince, he found that his presence was incredibly strange. However, the sovereign of Dan Yin Pei did not pay too much attention to him out of curiosity. At that moment, he cast a profound glance at Yu Xian before he sat down at the highest seat in the hall. With a smile, he looked at the 1 million cultivators below him, and there was disdain and derision hidden on his face. He lifted his right hand and swung his arm. Immediately, Elder Mo Sang, who was bound by the threads of time, was brought over through the air. His elder's expression was calm, but the sadness in his eyes would occasionally fill his eyes. When he looked at Yu Xian, it was revealed. Do you want to watch the wedding and die, or do you want to watch it now? The sovereign of Dan Yin Pei asked faintly. His voice contained a tone that could decide a person's life and death. At the same time, Su Xianyi also sat down at the highest seat in the hall beside the sovereign of Dan Yin Pei. He did not even spare a glance at Mo Sang. Instead, he stared at Yu Xian and the third prince's backs before he shifted his gaze to look at the 1 million cultivators. A smile appeared on his face. The wedding can begin now. As he spoke, the sublime paragon of this true world took a step forward and stood to the left. He would be the one presiding over the grand wedding. The will of the Emperor of Abyss True World roared beyond the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss True World. As it reverberated in space, it filled the entire Emperor of Abyss True World, but it could not reach the ancient tree in the ocean where Su Xianyi had already distorted time and space. Su Xianyi could not see the long-haired and white-robed Su Ming walking forward in the galaxy. Wherever he went, the roars from the Emperor of Abyss True World would become even more shrill, but had already fallen into a state of decline. A will that belonged to Su Ming was slowly growing in the Emperor of Abyss True World's decline, and it gradually became dominant. Once Su Ming, who had harmonious Morris Alba, Expanse Cosmos, and True Sky Hill World, came to the corresponding Emperor of Abyss True World, the will of this true world could not fight against its inevitable destruction. Su Xianyi also saw the bald crane and the abyss dragon sneaking out of a cultivation planet in the Emperor of Abyss True World. They took away all the crystals in the planet, and even the crystal veins buried underground could not escape from the bald crane's claws. With smugness and excitement, the bald crane headed to another cultivation planet with the abyss dragon leading the way. Su Ming's expression was calm as he stood in the galaxy. With each step he took, he would move through endless space. His will had gathered behind him, and the great pressure from it caused the will of the Emperor of Abyss True World to be unable to fight back. It could only let out a soundless roar before it died. With his level of cultivation and will, Su Ming had already become the strongest person in this aeon. He had the right to look down on all manner of lives. It did not matter whether it was Dark Dawn, Saint D-Fire, or Arid Triad. It could be said that there was no place Su Ming could not step into, and there were few who could stop him. In silence, Su Ming's footsteps came to a stop. He stood beyond the capital planet of the Emperor of Abyss True World and stared at the gigantic cultivation planet formed by 1,000 planets. Su Ming saw the ocean, the ancient tree, and the people on the ancient tree. "I'm here," Su Ming mumbled. Almost at the instant Su Ming cast his gaze over, for the first time in the countless years of this aeon, the huge ancient tree let out a buzz. Chapter 1409. As a butterfly, Harmonious Morris Alba had stayed in the vast expanse for an eternity. It had been so long ago that even Harmonious Morris Alba itself might not know just how much prosperity had been born on its four wings. The cycle of eons repeated itself. Lives appeared again, and they died again and again because of the disaster. It was like snow falling from the sky. Perhaps each snowflake was a life from an aeon. They floated down and were buried on the ground, but even more of them fell from the sky. It was as if there was no end to the snow, then there would be no end to all lives. Even if someone saw it fall with their own eyes, they would never be able to know just how many snowflakes had fallen in the snow. It was just like how Harmonious Morris Alba did not know just how much prosperity had been born on its four wings. There were 4 eras in this aeon, and Su Ming was in the 4th era. Perhaps in the future, when someone looked back at the past and flipped through the ancient history, they would be able to vaguely find some traces of this era. Those traces were the 5 great true worlds of the 4th era. The rise and fall of the 5th true world, the coexistence of the 4 great true worlds, Su Ming, and the return of Dark Dawn and Saint D-Fire were all signs of the 4th era. Before the 4th era was the 3rd era. Su Ming had already found the signs of that era. They were the 9 great true worlds, Sui, Qinzi, Ikang, and the Old Man Extermination. There were only 3 signs of the 2nd era, and they were Shu, Wei, and Wu. It was an era filled with tribes, filled with the flames of war and slaughter. It was the most prosperous era for antecedental spirits. The Old Man from Heavenly Spirit Tribe was the tribe elder of Heavenly Spirit Tribe. The era had started due to a disaster, and it ended when Shu and Wu left to become Saint D-Fire and Dark Dawn. It ended when Wei disappeared, and the 9 great true worlds were formed. The Old Man from Heavenly Spirit Tribe was a person from the 2nd era. He was born at the end of the 1st era, and he died at the end of the 4th era. It could be said that he had lived through almost all the eras of that era. When he was born, it was the 1st era. It was a world where ancestral spirits existed. They taught all lives everything, and as the ancestral spirits came from different camps, they were divided into 3 parts. The start of the era came from the disaster of the previous aeon, and the end of the era was also a disaster. However, this was not an epic disaster that would affect a large area. It was a remnant disaster that would affect a small area. It would only destroy those who had not fused with Harmonious Morris Alba Expanse Cosmos in the previous aeon, but had used a unique method to escape the epic disaster. It was as if they had cheated and were wiped out by the remnant tribulation. Therefore, the 1st era came to an end. Before they died, they summoned the All Spirits Temple, and the legacy of that temple began in this era. Before the 1st aeon, during the era when the ancestral spirits were destroyed, there were some unique things that remained eternally. They did not fuse with their other selves. but they were not destroyed, because perhaps their existence was allowed by harmonious Morris alba, or perhaps it was because arid triads could not bear part with them. For example, there was a tree that once grew on a planet a very, very long time ago. A young man had once lived under that tree, and there he had spoken of his grievances, his love, his friendship, and his life. Many years later, the elder grew up with the elder. With the elder's help, the elder grew green, and one day, the elder became middle-aged. The elder of the past quietly said one sentence under the elder: "I'm leaving. If I fail, then there will definitely be someone after me who will continue down my path. If I succeed, then you will be eternally indestructible. If your will is born one day, then you will know that I have succeeded." That elder's name was Arid Triad. From then on, the elder of the elder's tree continued to exist through the Aeon disasters. It was never destroyed until its will was born. It watched the sun rise and set, the planets change, and the galaxy change. It knew that the elder of the past had succeeded, but occasionally it would remember the past. It would remember the elder's murmurs under the elder's tree, and when it did, it would usually last for an aeon. It could sense that the elder of the past had changed. He had become unfamiliar and terrifying, but the only thing that did not change was the promise that he would never be destroyed. On that day, while it was immersed in its memories, it suddenly sensed a pair of eyes looking at it from a galaxy. That gaze made it feel as if it was looking at the elder of the past, but when it looked closely, it found that it was not him. However, the two of them were very similar. This wasn't a similarity in soul, appearance, or bloodline. It was a feeling, just a feeling. To protect some people and things that they had to protect, a powerful belief was born in their hearts. They wanted to do something that no one had ever done before. It was the same feeling they had. Su Ming stared at the elder's tree on the cultivation planet. He could see an ancient air about it. In fact, he could sense a thick air of time on the elder's tree. The heaviness of it allowed Su Ming to instantly know that the elder was not born in this aeon. He took a step forward and stepped into the planet, appearing above the vast sea. He stood on the waves on the surface of the sea, under the majestic ancient tree. It was just like how a young man had stood under the tree a long, long time ago, and he had spoken of grievances he could not tell anyone else. While standing there quietly, Su Ming could vaguely hear the sounds of laughter coming from the ancient tree's crown, where each of its leaves was like a square. Those cheers were very fake, and there was a hint of flattery in them. Each of the cultivators there wore an invisible mask, and based on all the changes in the world around them, their masks would naturally change. Some people's masks were very good, and when they changed, no one would be able to see them. Some people's skills were not very good, and the changes in their masks did not seem very coordinated. But no matter what, this was a wedding that was filled with falsehood in Su Ming's eyes. The bride's expression was apathetic, and her entire body was covered in seals. The groom's expression was aloof, and there seemed to be anguish in his complicated emotions. As the prince's father, the Emperor of Abyss could not join the wedding. He could only watch quietly from the distance, and a sigh he could not say turned into a sigh in his heart. Even the sublime paragon did not have the dignity of a powerful warrior. He was willing to lower his head and become a witness to this absurdity. The father was not a father, and the son was not a son. There was also the sovereign of dawn, who was staring at the people's cultivation bases with a cold and mocking sneer. All of this was an incredibly ludicrous joke in Su Ming's eyes. Only Elder Mo Sang was the only color in this absurdity, and it made Su Ming's heart soften. Su Ming lifted his right hand and pressed it against the ancient tree. At the instant he touched it lightly, an old voice appeared in his head. That voice lasted for a long time, and it echoed in the air until it became a lingering echo. "What is your name?" Su Ming was silent for a moment before he answered softly. "Su Ming, the feeling you give me is the same as his." "Su Ming, the feeling you give me is the same as his." The ancient tree sighed, and its murmurs echoed in Su Ming's mind. "His name is Arid Triad. He told me that on the day my will is born, I will understand that he succeeded Su Ming was silent as he stared at the ancient tree. In truth, he had already guessed some things before this. There had to be a reason why the tree could exist for eternity in arid triad expanse cosmos. That reason was clearly not because the tree had fused with its other self, because that sort of existence was currently asleep. Even if there were some unique methods to temporarily wake them up, it would be difficult for them to live for eternity. It was just like Su Ming had once been puzzled as to why Tian would hide in Een Death Vortex and not come out. When he learned that there was a group of people in the world who had fused with their other selves and could not be destroyed under the disaster, but there was only one before and one after each aeon, he woke up after a total of 200 years. Clearly, Tian was not Tian, and neither was he true morning Tao world sublime paragon. Perhaps all of this was because there was indeed a sublime paragon who had turned into a fragmented soul after his battle against Su Xianyi. Perhaps the fragmented soul had fulfilled certain conditions, which was why it had turned into a clone that was not Tian. Een Death Vortex is a good place for me to sleep. When Su Ming left Een Death Vortex to head to Ninth Summit, he had turned his head around to cast a scrutinizing glance at Een Death Vortex and left behind these words. If you have the chance to see him, remember to tell him to come and visit me. I haven't seen him for a long, long time. The ancient tree's ancient voice rose and fell in Su Ming's heart. With a sigh, it gradually faded away. He can hear you. Perhaps before long, he will appear, Su Ming said softly after remaining silent for a moment. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he spoke softly and patted the ancient tree. When he lifted his head, he took a step forward and walked towards the wedding ceremony at the top of the tree. No one could see his arrival. It did not matter whether it was Su Xianyi or the sovereign of Don Yanpei. If Su Ming did not want to, they would not be able to notice his arrival. Only the third prince could. When the sublime paragon of this true world spoke of the wedding ceremony with a smile, and his voice filled with blessings echoed in the universe, the third prince suddenly lifted his head and stared into the distance. Over there stood Su Ming. A complicated and conflicted look appeared on his face. When he stared, Su Ming stared back at him. Is the seed of life extermination really that important? Su Ming stared at the third prince. He did not see the foppish young master of the past, but a familiar figure. Su Ming was not surprised by its existence. He had already learned about it when he was in Harmonious Morris Alba Expanse Cosmos. It was his childhood friend, his best friend, and his companion, who had patted his chest and told Su Ming loudly that he would protect him for the rest of his life. Su Ming's voice echoed in the air, but did not reach anyone else's ears. Only the third prince could hear it. Silence, speechlessness, and complicated emotions caused him to not know how to answer. After a long while, Lei Chan shook his head and mumbled, "You don't understand. I hereby announce that this will be the grandest wedding ceremony in the Emperor of Abyss True World. It will be witnessed by all the families in the Emperor of Abyss True World, as well as the True Worlds will." The sublime paragon of this true world, who could not see Su Ming, was still smiling and saying his blessings. The 1,000,000 cultivators of this true world who could not see Su Ming were still laughing and chatting happily. Su Xianyi, who could not see Su Ming, was still staring at the man and woman in front of him with a kind expression. They were Su Xianyi's sons, and they were the partners he had chosen for his son. They were the seed of life extermination, which was about to become complete once it was nourished. There was also the sovereign of Don Yanpei, who could not see Su Ming. When he smiled, he lifted his right hand, intending to land it on Mo Sang's head. He wanted to kill his elder so that red would appear in the wedding ceremony, as if it was a joyous occasion. But at that moment, I don't have a witness. Su Ming's words echoed in the ears of all the living beings in the universe. They were faint, but at the instant they appeared, all their hearts roared as if they were struck by lightning. It was as if the will of heaven had spoken. I beg for double monthly votes. Chapter 1410. Su Ming's voice reverberated through the universe like a thunderclap. It spread in all directions, causing the hearts of the near 1 million cultivators in the area to tremble violently. In fact, they felt as if the earth was shaking and the mountains were swaying. Not only were their bodies swaying, even their cultivation bases were instantly thrown into disarray. They could not gather them together at all. Mouthfuls of blood sprayed out of the mouthful of 1 million cultivators, causing the stench of blood to grow even more intense. Even the leaves on the ancient tree seemed to be covered with red spots. The 1 million cultivators from the Emperor of Abyss True World felt pain at that moment. It even surpassed the pressure formed by the roar of the True World's will. The intense pain that made them feel as if their bodies were about to be torn apart and their cultivation bases were about to explode caused shrill screams of pain to echo in the air. The 36 generals of Abyss were all present at that moment. Their levels of cultivation varied from Fate Realm to Life Realm, but no matter what level of cultivation they possessed, at that moment, shock appeared on their pale faces. The 8 kings of Abyss were also present. They sat near the hall and were staring at the sublime paragon with smiles on their faces. At the instant Su Ming's voice echoed in their ears, their souls were shaken by the sudden change. Their bodies shuddered against their will, and their hearts seemed to have been suppressed by a powerful will, causing them to feel as if it was difficult for them to breathe. Even if they were in Death Realm, at that moment, they looked like helpless mortals in the face of a disaster. The Emperor of Abyss True World's face was stark pale at that moment. His right hand seized the leaf of the ancient tree beneath him, and his ears buzzed non-stop. For a period of time, he could not hear a single sound around him. Compared to them, the sublime paragon was in a slightly better state, but blood trickled out of the corners of his mouth. He staggered a few steps back, and when he lifted his head, he hid his shock with ferociousness on his face. He looked swiftly at Su Ming, who had walked out of thin air in the distance. His white robes fluttered in the wind like the clouds, and his long black hair draped loosely over his shoulders. His expression was indifferent, and his eyes were calm like water, as if he had seen through the vicissitudes of time. He seemed to have walked out from a painting, as if he had transcended the mortal world. At the instant he saw Su Ming, a brilliant light shone in Su Xianyi's eyes. His killing intent instantly reached its peak. He glared at Su Ming, and even his breathing quickened. Su Xianyi's hatred towards Su Ming had already been carved into his bones, and it was mainly because the two of them possessed true Morning Dao World. During that possession, Su Xian had been defeated, and the plan he had prepared for years had gone down the drain. It would have been better if someone else had fought against him for his Dao, but Su Ming had fought against him. Su Xian cannot accept this. He could not accept the fact that he had used the foolish teenager who had only been able to complete nurturing the seed of life extermination and had been abandoned. In fact, he had even thought that Su Xian was his father, and, in the end, he had snatched away true Morning Dao World that belonged to him. In Su Xianyi's eyes, Su Ming was incredibly stupid and was destined to be manipulated by him for the rest of his life. If he wanted him to live, he would live, and if he wanted him to die, he would die. His fate was bound to be in Su Xianyi's hands, and he could do whatever he wanted with it. It did not matter whether it was Dark Mountain, the barren lands of divine essence, Morning Dao sect, or the final gap in Arid Triad. Su Ming was just that to Su Xianyi. He was incredibly stupid and could be used to the extreme until he had no value left. It was especially so in Su Xianyi's eyes. Su Ming's final value was to nurture the seed of life extermination. Once he was done with it, if it were not because Sang was reluctant to let him go, he would have killed him a long time ago. That was an existence akin to an ant. It was impossible for him to compare to Su Xianyi's son, and it was even more difficult for him to oppose Su Xianyi. That person was a slave, and Su Xianyi was the master. It was especially so when Su Ming had come to question him in an incredibly ludicrous manner, asking him why he had sent Yu Xian away. No matter what sort of expression Su Xian had put on at that time, The true thoughts in his heart had been a cold sneer and derision. Yu Xian was the second person Su Xian he had nurtured the seed of life extermination, and she was also the wife he had personally chosen for his son. How could Su Ming dare to touch her with his lowly status? In Su Xianyi's eyes, Su Ming might be an abyss builder, but he was destined to be a slave. He was not worthy of the wife he had chosen for his son. Everything was in his control, and with one word, he could decide Su Ming's life and death. This feeling had existed in Su Xianyi for a long time, so much so that even with his ambitious and ruthless personality, he could not accept Su Ming's sudden appearance when he was possessing true Morning Dao World. He had even forced him back, causing Su Xian to only watch helplessly as Su Ming used the preparations he had made over the years to perfectly possess true Morning Dao World. This matter was a pain that made Su Xianyi's heart feel as if it was being torn apart. He could not heal it, and neither could he. He had originally wanted to pass true Morning Dao World to his son after he possessed it, so that would be the foundation for the Abyss Builders to rise to power. But all of this had been snatched away by the lowly slave before him. This hatred caused Su Xianyi's killing intent to surge to a monstrous degree the moment he saw Su Ming. He let out a cold harumph and sat down. His killing intent might have surged to a monstrous degree, but Su Xianyi was definitely not an impulsive person. In his eyes, Mo Sang had definitely arranged for Su Ming to appear in this place. But since Su Ming dared to come, he had to have something to rely on. I'm here, my beloved son is here, and the Sovereign of Dawn is here. This child cannot possibly cause any trouble. He did not know that Su Ming had gone to harmonious Morris Alba Expanse Cosmos, or else he would definitely have a different expression on his face at that moment. Almost at the instant Su Xianyi looked at Su Ming with a cold sneer, the Sovereign of Dawn Yanpei's originally arrogant expression changed in an unprecedented manner. The change was so great that it caused the Sovereign of Dawn Yanpei to shudder lightly. In fact, his breathing instantly quickened. His pupils shrank, and shock as well as extreme terror appeared in his eyes. It made his skin crawl, and he instinctively wanted to stand up and run. His slight shudders instantly caused Su Xianyi to be surprised. When Su Xianyi looked over, the Sovereign of Dawn Yanpei's expression had already returned to normal. His terror and shock had already been covered up by a relaxed expression. With his level of cultivation, there were only a handful of people in the world who could make him so afraid, and Su Ming was one of them. That was why he had been shocked when he saw Su Ming and heard his words. The scene in true Morning Dao World a few months ago had completely intimidated the Sovereign of Dawn Yanpei. Yanpei ignored Su Xianyi's gaze and stared at Su Ming. When Su Xianyi appeared, he had thought that Su Ming's voice was slightly familiar. When Su Ming's figure appeared, the Sovereign of Dawn Yanpei's heart trembled. He might have never seen Su Ming's face, but that voice, he would never forget it. The voice that sounded like a nightmare, the voice that could decide his life and death with just a flip of his hand, and the scenes beyond Ninth Summit that still brought lingering fear to the Sovereign of Dawn Yanpei. The Sovereign of Dawn Yanpei instantly recognized the person before him. He was the terrifying old monster who had terrified him to the core outside Ninth Summit sect. It's him. It's him. A voice roared in the Sovereign of Dawn Yanpei's heart. His hair became even more numb, and even his limbs instantly turned cold, but he did not show it on his face. However, an unprecedented storm had already raged in his heart. Damn it, I've already left true Morning Dao World. I've already ordered all the cultivators from Dark Dawn and Saint Defire to not provoke Ninth Summit. I haven't even taken half a step into true Morning Dao World. Why? Why? Why'd he still chase me down to this place? The Sovereign of Dawn Yanpei's face turned slightly pale. Countless thoughts instantly rose in his mind, but the moment they appeared, they remembered Su Ming's terrifying level of cultivation, and they were immediately crushed. The others could not see the Sovereign of Dawn Yanpei's actions clearly, but when Su Xianyi looked at him, he saw that Yanpei had a displeased expression on his face. He was frowning, as if he was expressing his displeasure towards this matter. I've embarrassed myself in front of you, Sovereign of Dawn. This person is a lowly slave of mine. Today, he came to ruin my son's happy day. I will definitely make him bleed on the spot. When Su Xian Yi said those words coldly, he turned his head around and looked at Su Ming coldly. He did not know that his words had stirred up an even stronger storm in the Sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei's heart. It was so strong that it even surpassed what Yin Pei felt when he saw Su Ming's sudden arrival. The Sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei was so shocked that his expression changed drastically, and he stood up. You said, he's your slave? A huge storm raged in the Sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei's heart. As it buzzed, he looked as if he could not wrap his head around it. He was once. I pitied his lowly birth and gave him the status of a slave. But this child doesn't know what's good for him. He repaid my kindness with enmity and ruined my plans. The killing intent in Su Xian Yi's eyes grew stronger. Yin Pei shuddered. When he looked at Su Xian Yi, there was a strange look hidden in his gaze, but at the same time, he released a sigh of relief in his heart. So this terrifying old monster did not come for me, but for Su Xian Yi, who doesn't know his place. He's lowly. Ugh, if he's lowly, then darn it. I've never seen anyone who is more noble than him. If he's lowly, then what am I? Who in all of Dark Dawn and Saint Defire would dare to say that they are nobler than him? Even I would want to meet him if it wasn't, because I was afraid that he would want to kill me. If I could give him some guidance, then it would be a serendipity. This Su Xian Yi is either out of his mind or he doesn't know the truth. How dare he say that this terrifying senior is lowly and say that he's his slave? The Sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei immediately stood up without any hesitation and took a quick step to the side. He was a little further away from Su Xian Yi, afraid that his seat would cause Su Ming to misunderstand him. Before he left, he did not forget to grab his elder Mo Sang. He wanted to take Mo Sang away as well. After all, he had promised Su Xian Yi that he would personally kill this person. With his status as a Sovereign of Dawn, the most important principle in his life was to keep his promises. In fact, he pitted Su Xian Yi very much in his heart. He thought that it was clear that Su Xian Yi did not know just how terrifying the old monster before him was. Should he give him a reminder? But if he did, he was afraid that he would offend Su Ming. But if he did not, he felt that Su Xian Yi was a chess piece he had chosen, and it would not be good for him to watch this person fall into his trap. He should do his part. Please give me double monthly votes. Chapter 14:11. As he hesitated and his hand was about to touch Elder Mo Sang, Su Ming walked over slowly. A ripple appeared in his eyes, which were as calm as water. It instantly turned into a cold glare that looked like the surface of a lake reflected by the moon. He cast a faint glance at the Sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei. He stopped moving and looked at Mo Sang. A gentle look appeared in his eyes, as if he had forgotten his status and level of cultivation. He was still a child from Dark Mountain, a child who laughed and chatted happily beside their elder. Su Ming wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed deeply. He bowed to his elder, to Dark Mountain, and to Su Ming's loyalty to his friends. I am Su Ming of Dark Mountain. Greetings, elder. The Sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei's extended hand came to an abrupt halt at that instant. His expression immediately changed, and he was completely stunned. Su Ming's act of bowing and his words continuously appeared in his mind, but he soon registered what was going on. A monstrous wave of anger and killing intent instantly turned into a roar that rushed into his head. Damn you, Su Xian Yi, you set me up. At that moment, the Sovereign of Dawn Yin Pei no longer had any principles in his mind. He had also cast aside his moral principles. Instead, he hated Su Xian Yi to the core. To him, it did not matter whether Su Xian Yi had done it on purpose or not. He had still set him up and placed him in a near-death situation. This old monster, who he could not even avoid in time, instantly stood against him. He refused to believe that Su Xian Yi truly did not know just how terrifying Su Ming was. In fact, in Yin Pei's eyes, Su Xian, he must have known that Su Ming would come today and dragged him to kill Su Ming's elder so that he could bind him to his side. Damn it, damn it. Thank goodness I didn't kill him. Almost at the instant the sovereign of Don Yin Pei registered what was going on, with his powerful level of cultivation and the reflexes he possessed as a sovereign of Dawn, the hand he had extended towards Elder Mo Sang froze. Then, without any hesitation, he immediately pushed towards the elder. However, he did not grab Elder Mo Sang. He merely supported him gently, and there seemed to be a great sense of respect in his voice. It caused the threads of time binding Elder Mo Sang's body to instantly shatter. When they disappeared without a sound, the sovereign of Don Yin Pei supported his elder with his right hand, and a gentle smile appeared on his face. There was even a hint of respect in that smile. What I admire the most in my life are heroes like you, fellow Taoist. You know that your level of cultivation is not high, but you can give up everything for your family. This sort of person must be respected. This is kinship, this is kinship. This is exactly the same as me. I also have this kind of personality. I couldn't bear to see fellow Taoists be captured, so I interfered. I definitely couldn't let such a person die in front of me. I made a move to save fellow Taoist. Fellow Taoist, I did not say it clearly before, and even joked with you, because I am a guest invited by Su Xian Yi. I might not be familiar with this person, but since he invited me with great kindness, I came despite my reluctance. But since I was able to meet someone like you here, this trip was worth it. That joke was also to test whether you are truly a hero. Right now, I am certain that you should not mind what I said just now. Someone like you, please accept my bow. Yin Pei's expression was incredibly sincere, and he spoke as if he was telling the truth. As he spoke, he took a few steps back, wrapped his fist in his palm, and bowed deeply towards Mo Sang. Mo Sang was stunned. When a barely noticeable glint shone in his eyes, the sovereign of Dawn, Yin Pei, lifted his head and stared coldly at Su Xian Yi, who was frowning and had a slightly surprised expression on his face. Fellow Taoist Su, I didn't expect that you would be this sort of person. Yin Pei Chun. Su Xian Yi's pupil shrank. Yin Pei's expression had changed so quickly that Su Xian Yi's heart suddenly let out a thump. Before he could finish speaking, he was interrupted by the sovereign of Dawn, Yin Pei's shout. You disappoint me too much. Your daughter doesn't want to marry anyone else. So why did you leave so many seals on her? Not only did you seal her thoughts, you also sealed her soul. You treat your own family like this, and it's practically an act of flattery. You disappoint me, and I'm ashamed to be associated with you. Just treat it as me meddling in other people's business. I have long since been unable to continue watching this, and I can no longer tolerate it. As he spoke, the sovereign of Don Yin Pei successfully replaced Su Ming's limelight and became the center of attention. He lifted his right hand and pointed at Yu Xian. Immediately, the bell he had given her started trembling on its own. When it collided with the bell, it let out a series of clear, tinkling sounds. Every single time those sounds echoed in the air, Yu Xian's expression would show struggle. Fog gradually filled her eyes, and it looked as if it was swiftly swept away by the wind. Slowly, clarity returned to her. When the bell stopped ringing, Yu Xian shuddered. All the seals in her body disappeared, and she completely regained her senses. When Yin Pei saw this, he let out a sigh of relief in his heart. Fortunately, he had given her the bell. Because of it, everything could be explained, and no one would be able to find any obvious clues. He should not have provoked that terrifying old monster too much. As Yu Xian's expression became clear and her body shuddered slightly, she remembered many things. No matter what, Yin Pei was a sovereign of Dawn. When he took action, he had not just wiped away the seals that had been placed on Yu Xian's body over the past few days. He had also wiped away the seals that had been in Yu Xian's body for many years, causing Yu Xian's mind to feel as if it had been in a daze for an unknown number of years. With just one glance, she saw Su Ming, who was watching everything around him with a ghost of a smile on his face. She could no longer avert her gaze. It turned into tears and blurred the world. But there was one figure in that world, and it was a figure that she could remember clearly no matter how many cycles of life and death he had gone through. The memories of her childhood rose in her mind. The thin and frail boy lying quietly on the ground was her older brother. He was not her family, but he was more like family than anyone else. They grew up together and accompanied each other every day. Her older brother, who could not speak and could not open his eyes, was the family she cherished the most in her memories. She remembered that she had accompanied him, telling him about the blue sky, the darkness of the night, her own cultivation, her grievances, and the future. She held his hand, causing the cold hand to slowly gain warmth. During that period of time, she was very happy. Even though her daily training was very difficult, and she was always bullied and mocked by others, she was still strong. She wanted to protect her older brother for the rest of his life. Then, one day, she was taken away. She still remembered the last time she looked at him before she was taken away. At that time, he was still lying on the ground, unmoving, unable to open his eyes, unable to open his mouth. On that day, she cried. The person who took her away told her that as long as she was obedient, he would wake up one day. That was why she chose to be obedient and chose to leave. That departure lasted for nearly her entire life. That period of time seemed to have been far too long ago, so long that her memories became blurry. In fact, it did not seem like she wanted it to be blurry, but for some unknown reason, she had completely forgotten about the past. She became a direct descendant of a family in the Emperor of Abyss True World. She had her father, her mother, and her family. During that period of time, she was very happy, but every single time when it was late at night, she would have a feeling that she had forgotten the most important person in her life. But no matter how hard she tried, she could not remember who it was. She would often dream of a back that was so indistinct that she could not see it clearly. On the day her mother died, she watched her mother gradually close her eyes with tears falling from her eyes. During that instant, her mother opened her eyes, and before she died, she looked at Yu Xian with pity and reluctance to part with her in a profound manner. She looked as if she wanted to say something, but in the end, she only said one sentence. Xian is a type of daylily. You are the grass in the rain. I hope that you will be happy for the rest of your life and not be sad. Yu Xian had been muddle-headed at that time, and she had always thought that she understood it, but only at that moment did she understand the profound meaning contained within those words. Perhaps it was because of the figure in her dreams, or perhaps it was because no matter how strong the seal was, it could not seal the thoughts in her memories. Before the wedding, she fled. She did not know where she wanted to go, but for some strange reason, she returned to true Morning Dao world. She also remembered that when she fled and captured the Abyss Dragon, she seemed to have seen a vague figure, but when she turned her head around, she did not see it. At that moment, she understood that it was her father's figure. He had been standing not too far away and watching her quietly. He had watched her leave into the distance, as if he was sending her off with a reluctance to part with her. During the days Su Xian he had been in isolation, Yu Xian had come to true Morning Dao world. She had searched for a feeling that even she could not clearly sense, and she had returned to in Death Vortex, where she had been born. She had been able to become entangled with Su Ming the moment she saw him, without feeling any sense of unfamiliarity. This was not due to her personality, but because her sealed memories had been infected by the presence of her life. What she did not know was that once she appeared in front of Su Ming, the voice calling him Big Brother in his dreams gradually disappeared. She remembered everything. All her memories from the moment she was born rose in her mind at that instant. As the seal disappeared, Yu Xian stared at Su Ming in a daze, and tears that had lasted for thousands of years fell from the corners of her eyes. I am Yu Xian, the daylily in the rain. My father is the second god of berserkers. My home is in the berserkers' lands. Yu Xian mumbled. She lifted her head, and when she looked at Su Ming again, she bit her lip and whispered a sentence that had echoed in Su Ming's dreams for many years. Big Brother. Su Ming approached her. There was no power in arid triad expanse cosmos that could stop him. When Yu Xian lifted her head, Su Ming had already arrived in front of her. He gently pulled the crying Yu Xian into his arms. I promised you that one day I would come and find you. That day is now. Su Ming caressed Yu Xian's long hair. When he spoke, he lifted his head and looked at the silent third prince. Their gazes met, and Su Ming saw the complicated look on the third prince's face, while Lei Chun saw the sentimental look in Su Ming's eyes. Second day of double monthly votes. Please get monthly votes. Chapter 14:12. With the flip of his hand, he could summon clouds, and with the flip of his hand, he could summon rain. Su Ming's arrival had quietly changed the invisible laws in the land. First, the hearts of the 1,000,000 cultivators trembled. Then the sovereign of Don Yin Pei's strange actions. When Su Ming looked towards the third prince and their gazes met, it was as if a dormant volcano was showing signs of eruption. Sir, how dare you barge in another barren planet and act so arrogantly? I like to see just what sort of divine abilities you have. A freezing glare shone in the sublime paragon's eyes. He forced down the nervousness in his heart. With his level of cultivation and intellect, there was no way he would not be able to tell just how terrifying Su Ming was. But at that moment, he had no other choice. As the sublime paragon of this expanse cosmos, and Su Xian, he standing behind him, he could only brace himself and say those words. Besides, in his heart, Su Xianyi's strength could be said to be unfathomable. Compared to the person in front of him, he was more inclined to believe that Su Xian had the upper hand. In fact, there was another thought in his heart. Since Su Xian had arrived in such a shocking manner, the battle was unavoidable. If Su Xian was strong, then everything would be fine, but if he lost, then perhaps this would be his chance. At the instant these thoughts appeared in his head, the sublime paragon took a swift step forward and charged toward Su Ming. When he lifted his right hand and swung his arm, a vast power surged out with a bang and turned into a huge statue of the abyss in front of him. It charged towards Su Ming to suppress him, but there was no great killing intent within it. It seemed like it only wanted to force Su Ming back. Howls reverberated in the air, and booming sounds instantly deafened everyone's ears. When the statue of the abyss closed in on Su Ming did not even spare the sublime paragon a glance. He lifted his right hand and casually pointed forward. With it, the weather changed. Wind stirred up and clouds surged. The sky above the cultivation planet looked as if the will of heaven had descended and turned into a huge vortex that rotated with loud rumbles. An astonishing will instantly descended, and as Su Ming pointed forward, it pushed down on the sublime paragon. With it, a loud bang shot up. The statue of the abyss formed by the sublime paragon shattered to pieces. He coughed up a mouthful of blood, and his body crashed into the invisible will. He shuddered, and he coughed up 8 mouthfuls of blood. Like a kite with its string snapped, he was flung into the distance. While he was in midair, his blood gushed out rapidly. His body fell from the ancient tree and disappeared into Guhai. What a wily old fox. He used a divine ability that didn't contain too much killing intent to lure me into attacking. He was certain that I wouldn't try to kill him, so he gambled. He didn't even dodge and took the initiative to face me head on. Now that he's seriously injured, he doesn't need to fight anymore. Even if Su Xian wins in the end, he won't be able to say anything about him. When Su Ming's will descended, the sublime paragon coughed up blood and fell backwards into the sea. Immediately, the expressions of the 1,000,000 cultivators in the area, who had been shocked to begin with, changed drastically, and shock appeared on their faces. As Su Ming's will descended, the sublime paragon coughed up blood and fell backwards into the sea. Immediately, the expressions of the 1,000,000 cultivators in the area, who had been shocked to begin with, changed drastically. Shock appeared on their faces. They did not know Su Ming, but at that moment, his figure had already turned into a nightmare. It was forcefully branded into their minds, and it became an eternal memory. The third prince was silent, as if he was not too surprised by all of this. The sovereign of Don Yin Pei also looked as if it was only natural. He knew how terrifying Su Ming was a long time ago, and at that moment, he felt a hint of admiration for the sublime paragon, whom he had not paid much attention to previously. He thought that this person knew how to adapt to circumstances, and perhaps he could train him in the future. However, Su Xianyi's pupils shrank, and a freezing glare that was as sharp as needles appeared in his eyes as he stared at Su Ming. "I've only come here for 3 matters." Su Ming averted his gaze from the third prince and looked at the sullen Su Xianyi. This powerful warrior, who had once been unfathomable in Su Ming's eyes, was just a joke at that moment. The vastness of Arid Triad's gap, the entire Morning Dao sect's concealment, the plan to spy on true Morning Dao world's will, and the plan to stop Dark Dawn's camp from descending in Divine Essence Star Ocean. All of this was because of Su Xianyi. Su Ming's use of Su Ming and everything else, including the nurturing of the seed of life extermination. All of the past appeared in Su Ming's mind before turning into dust. "The first matter is that I want to take Yuxian away. You've taken care of her for many years, so I want to tell you about this." Su Ming caressed Yuxian's hair. When he spoke slowly, his eyes were calm. "The second matter is that I want to return an item you've left with me for a long time." As Su Ming spoke, he lifted his left hand and seized the air. The 5th kiln appeared in Su Ming's left hand with a bang. Flames surrounded it, and it had shrunk greatly. At that moment, it floated on Su Ming's palm. He allowed the flames to surround his left hand, and with a calm expression, he pushed the kiln forward. "Your clone is in there, along with your wife's body, which is waiting to be resurrected. Why did you insist on leaving such an important item with Su Ming? You didn't even say that you wanted to ask for it back. Could it be that you don't want it?" Su Ming smiled faintly. He could already see through Su Xianyi's complicated feelings towards the 5th kiln. He could tell that Su Xian did not want to face the 5th kiln, which was why he decided to ignore it. When he saw the 5th kiln, Su Xianyi's expression turned even darker, but only he knew the complicated feelings and anguish under it. At the instant the third prince saw the 5th kiln and heard Su Ming's words, a shudder ran through his body. When he looked over, a hint of sadness appeared on his face. "I've already completed the first 2 matters. Right now, there's only the 3rd matter left, which is to end this grudge with you." Su Ming looked at Su Xianyi. At the instant he finished speaking, Su Xianyi suddenly threw his head back and laughed. That laughter was filled with a presumptuous and arrogant air, along with an air of looking down on the world. It was as if he was arrogant enough to toy with all lives in his hands. One unfilial son. At this point, is there any meaning in your words? Su Ming's expression remained calm, but there was a hint of freezing coldness in his words, causing Su Xianyi to instinctively stop speaking. Instead, he stared at Su Ming, and after some time, a cold sneer appeared on his lips. As expected of the son of Su Zhan and the sacred lady of the spiritlings from Dark Dawn, not only do you have the Abyss Builder's inborn divine abilities, you also have the spiritling's powerful, indestructible power. Your growth as a berserker has allowed you to possess the berserker's brute strength. Divine Essence Star Ocean has allowed you to learn how to be cunning. Not bad. You're not much weaker than my real son in this aspect. Then I'd like to know, how will you end this grudge? As Su Xianyi laughed coldly, he stood there like a towering mountain. Even if Su Ming had arrived, and even if he had seen his strength with his own eyes, his pride still did not allow him to show a single hint of weakness. He remained as domineering as ever. Su Ming was silent. He lowered his head to look at Yuxian, and a gentle look appeared in his eyes. "You can use me. You can make me nourish your seed of life extermination. You can make me do everything you want me to do, but you shouldn't have told me that you are my father." When Su Ming lifted his head, a freezing glare appeared in his eyes. At the instant he said those words, he took a step forward, and he was so fast that he instantly appeared in front of Su Xianyi. He lifted his right hand and pushed swiftly against Su Xianyi's chest. With it, Su Xianyi threw his head back and roared. He had been on guard since a long time ago, and the instant Su Ming closed in, he crushed an ancient jade that had appeared in his hand at some unknown point of time. A crack appeared on the ancient jade, but did not shatter completely. At that instant, a huge eight-headed figure manifested behind him. At the instant it appeared, an astonishing mighty pressure and presence erupted from it. It was so strong that it reached Avacania realm, causing a glint to appear in the sovereign of Dawn Yenpei's eyes, and the pressure on the 1 million cultivators in the area increased again. It caused the world to tremble, the weather to change, and the laws in the area to instantly fall into chaos. This was one of Su Xianyi's trump cards. As a hero of this expanse cosmos, he dared to scheme against true morning Tao world and create a gap in arid triad. There was no way such a person would not have a powerful backup. At that moment, Su Xianyi no longer held anything back. When the eight-headed figure appeared, it fused into Su Xianyi's body and appeared between him and Su Ming to crash into Su Ming's palm. Boom! A loud bang reverberated in the air, and the eight-headed figure crumbled. Su Ming's palm seemed to be able to tear through everything. When the eight-headed figure exuding a powerful presence crumbled to pieces, Su Ming pressed his palm against Su Xianyi's chest. Booming sounds lingered in the air, and Su Xianyi coughed up blood. He staggered backwards, and his expression changed several times. His pupils shrank, and for the first time, shock appeared on his face. What level of cultivation do you have? He could not help but be shocked. The eight-headed figure came from the ancient jade. It was not an item from this aeon, but a remnant from the previous aeon. The eight-headed figure that had first appeared also possessed power in Avacania realm. It might have only been there for a short period of time, but it had allowed Su Xianyi to step into Avacania realm and fight against the sovereign of Dawn Yenpei. Besides, the jade came from the previous aeon, which was why the laws in it were different from the current aeon. It could largely weaken the will of the current aeon, and in Su Xianyi's eyes, it could specifically target Su Ming, who had possessed true morning Tao world. However, he did not expect that the eight-headed figure in Avacania realm would shatter with just one touch from Su Ming. When the sovereign of Dawn Yenpei saw this, he instinctively took a few steps back. Once again, he witnessed Su Ming's terror, and it was definitely not a figment of his imagination. Su Ming was definitely at the peak of his aeon. By his side, Elder Imo Sang stared at Su Ming in a daze. Gradually, gratification appeared on his face, and an ancient air that surpassed his age appeared on his face. There was also the sublime sovereign, who had just surfaced from the surface of the sea under the ancient tree. He spread his divine sense slightly to observe what was happening above him. When he saw this, his heart trembled violently. Without any hesitation, he lifted his right hand and smacked his chest. He coughed up blood and continued to sink to the bottom of the sea. I beg for monthly votes. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.